The payment terminal beeped once, then twice. Declined flashed across the screen in merciless red letters. The woman in the tailored coat froze, her polished confidence shattering in the space between heartbeats. Behind her, a man in worn jeans reached into his pocket and pulled out his last $20 bill, money meant to feed his daughter for the week. He paid without thinking, without hesitation, without knowing that the stranger he'd just saved had fired him 3 weeks ago. What happens when kindness becomes evidence? When a CEO discovers the man she destroyed is the only one who showed her mercy? Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The morning started in the way most of Ethan Brooks' mornings had started for the past 3 weeks, with dread sitting heavy in his chest and $17.43 in his pocket. He stood outside Madison Elementary, watching through the chain-link fence as his daughter Sophie climbed the jungle gym with the kind of fearless joy only 8-year-olds possessed. Her backpack, decorated with hand-drawn stars because they couldn't afford the character ones, bounced against her shoulders as she waved goodbye one more time. Ethan waved back, forcing his smile to reach his eyes. She couldn't know. She couldn't see the eviction notice folded in his jacket pocket, or understand why dinner had been pasta 3 nights in a row. She couldn't sense that the $20 bill now crumpled in his palm was supposed to stretch across the next 6 days until his unemployment check, maybe, possibly, hopefully, arrived. "Love you, Daddy," Sophie's voice carried across the playground. "Love you more, Soph," he called back, his throat tight. She disappeared into the building, and his smile collapsed like a demolished building. Ethan turned away from the fence and started walking. Not toward the bus stop. He couldn't afford the fare anymore. Just walking, because movement felt like purpose, and purpose was the only thing keeping him upright. The city stretched before him in endless concrete and glass. 3 weeks ago, he'd walked these same streets in a different uniform, the navy blue jumpsuit of a maintenance worker at Hartwell Industries. The job hadn't been glamorous, but it had been stable. It had kept the lights on, and Sophie's belly full. It had given him something his previous life, the one before the accident, before the grief, before everything collapsed, had never provided: peace. Now even that was gone. Ethan's fingers traced the edge of the termination letter he'd memorized but couldn't throw away. Theft of company property. Violation of trust. Effective immediately. The words had been clinical, efficient, utterly devastating. No hearing, no investigation, no chance to defend himself. The security footage had been irrefutable, they'd said. Ethan Brooks, captured on camera, leaving the building with a prototype drive containing proprietary designs worth millions. Except Ethan had never touched that drive, had never even seen it, had spent that entire evening fixing a jammed door in the research wing while humming along to the radio, thinking about whether Sophie would want pancakes or waffles for breakfast. But who believes a janitor over security footage? Who listens when you have nothing? The streets blurred together as Ethan walked. His stomach cramped. Breakfast had been coffee, black, because they were out of milk and sugar. Lunch would be nothing. Dinner would be whatever he could stretch from that $20 and the half box of pasta in the cabinet. He found himself downtown without planning it, drawn by muscle memory to the places where life happened. The coffee shop on Moreau Street had been his guilty pleasure back when guilt was something he could afford. $7 for a latte had seemed reasonable when he had a paycheck. Now it seemed like a different universe entirely. Ethan stopped outside the window, watching people inside live lives that felt impossibly distant. A woman in a business suit typed furiously on her laptop. A young couple shared a pastry, laughing. An older man read the newspaper with reading glasses perched on his nose. Normal, easy, unaware. He should keep walking. He should save that $20. He should... The door opened and warmth spilled out, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon. A woman stepped out, phone pressed to her ear, and nearly collided with him. "I don't care what the board thinks, Michael. We need that presentation ready by..." She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes locking on Ethan's face. He recognized her instantly. Lena Hartwell, CEO, the woman whose signature had been on his termination letter. Time seemed to fracture. 3 weeks of humiliation and hunger crystallized into this single moment, standing face to face with the person who'd destroyed his life without a second thought. She looked exactly as she had in the company newsletters, Sharp blazer, perfectly styled dark hair, an air of absolute authority. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Ethan saw the moment she almost recognized him, the slight furrow of her brow, the pause in her stride. Then her attention snapped back to her phone call. Sorry, Michael. As I was saying, I want those numbers verified before the meeting. She stepped past Ethan without a backward glance, her heels clicking against the pavement with rhythmic precision. He watched her go, feeling something hollow expand in his chest. Of course she didn't remember him. Why would she? He'd been maintenance staff. Invisible. The person who fixed things while everyone else did the important work. The person she'd erased with a signature. Ethan turned back toward the coffee shop window. He should leave. Should save his money. Inside, he watched as Lena Hartwell approached the counter, her phone still pressed to her ear. She gestured to the barista, that universal signal for the usual, while continuing her conversation without missing a beat. The barista prepared her order with practiced efficiency, some complicated drink Ethan couldn't have pronounced when he'd had money, much less now. Lena ended her call, dropped her phone into her purse, and reached for her wallet. She pulled out a sleek black credit card and tapped it against the payment terminal. Declined. The word flashed across the screen in red letters. The barista's professional smile flickered. Lena's expression shifted from mild annoyance to confusion. She tried again. Declined. That's strange, Lena said, her voice carrying an edge of embarrassment. This card should absolutely... Let me try another one. She pulled out a second card. Same result. The coffee shop wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. The few customers scattered at tables had begun to notice. The woman on her laptop glanced up. The young couple stopped laughing. The man with the newspaper lowered it slightly. Ethan watched Lena Hartwell, CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, woman who commanded boardrooms and made decisions that affected hundreds of lives, stand frozen at a coffee counter, her polished exterior beginning to crack. I'm so sorry, the barista said, genuine sympathy in her voice. Do you have cash? I don't. Lena opened her wallet, rifled through it quickly. I don't carry cash. This is absurd. These cards are active. I just used one this morning. Her voice had risen slightly. Not loud, but enough. Enough that everyone in the shop was definitely watching now. Enough that her cheeks had begun to flush. Something twisted in Ethan's chest. Not satisfaction, though he'd have been justified in feeling it. Not revenge, though it was right there for the taking, easy as standing still and watching her humiliation compound. What he felt was recognition. He'd been there 3 weeks ago, not at a coffee counter, but in the HR office at Hartwell Industries, watching his life disassemble in real time while people stared. He'd felt that same hot flush of shame, that desperate need to explain that this wasn't right. This wasn't who he was. This was a mistake. His hand was already reaching into his pocket before his brain caught up. Excuse me, Ethan said, stepping forward. His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by weeks of not speaking to anyone but Sophie. I'll cover it. The barista looked at him. Lena Hartwell turned, her expression still caught between confusion and mortification. Their eyes met again, and this time Ethan saw the moment she almost placed his face. That's not necessary, Lena said quickly. I'm sure this is just a banking error. I'll call... Please. Ethan pulled out his $20 bill. The last one. Sophie's food money. It's fine. He handed it to the barista before Lena could protest further. The girl took it with a grateful smile, made change, and pushed it toward Ethan. He left it on the counter. What was he going to do with $3.20 anyway? Thank you, Lena said. Her voice had changed, become quieter, more human. That's very kind. I'll pay you back. I just need to... She fumbled with her phone, fingers slightly unsteady. What's your name? How can I... Don't worry about it, Ethan said. He was already turning toward the door, the hollow feeling in his chest expanding into something worse. He'd just spent Sophie's food money on a latte for the woman who'd fired him. The absurdity of it threatened to choke him. Wait, Lena called out. Please, I want to... But Ethan was already pushing through the door, back into the cold morning air. Behind him, he heard her call out again, heard the note of genuine distress in her voice, but he kept walking. What was the point? She didn't remember him. She'd destroyed his life with a signature and moved on without a backward glance, and he'd just given her his last $20. The street stretched ahead, longer now, heavier. Ethan's stomach cramped again, sharper this time. He had $3.20, a half box of pasta, maybe some butter if he was lucky. That had to last until the unemployment check arrived, if it arrived. He thought about Sophie at school, laughing on the jungle gym, unaware that her father had just made the stupidest, most inexplicable choice of his life. She'd ask about dinner tonight. She always did, her small face so hopeful. "Can we have something special, Daddy? With cheese?" What was he going to tell her? Ethan walked faster, as if he could outpace the decision he'd just made. The morning sun climbed higher, indifferent and warm. Somewhere behind him, Lena Hartwell was drinking her coffee, probably already absorbed back into her phone and her urgent calls and her world that worked exactly the way it was supposed to. And he was walking toward nothing, with nothing, on an empty stomach and emptier pockets. The rest of the day dissolved into a blur of survival arithmetic. Ethan walked to the public library and sat in the computer section, applying for jobs he was overqualified for and wouldn't get. Retail, fast food, warehouse work. Anything that didn't require references from his last employer, anything that wouldn't ask questions about the gap in his resume or the reason he'd left Hartwell Industries. His phone buzzed, a reminder that his rent was due in 3 days. $1,700 he didn't have. Couldn't have. The eviction notice in his pocket seemed to grow heavier. At 2 o'clock, his stomach cramped so badly he had to excuse himself to the bathroom. He splashed water on his face and stared at his reflection in the scratched mirror. When had he started looking this tired? This old? He was 34, but the man staring back looked a decade older. Shadows under his eyes, stubble he couldn't afford to shave properly, hair that needed cutting. This was what poverty looked like. Not dramatic, not sudden. Just a slow erosion of everything that made you feel human. By the time Ethan left the library, the afternoon had turned gray and cold. He walked to Madison Elementary, arriving 20 minutes early so he could sit on the bench across the street and just breathe. This part of his day, watching Sophie emerge from school, her backpack bouncing, her face lighting up when she saw him, this was the only part that mattered. The bell rang. Children exploded from the building in a chaos of noise and color. Ethan spotted Sophie immediately. She always looked for him first, scanning the crowd with those serious eyes she'd inherited from her mother. Their eyes met. Sophie's face transformed, and she ran toward him with the kind of abandon that made his chest hurt. "Daddy!" She crashed into his legs, hugging him tight. "Guess what? Mrs. Peterson said my story was the best in class. She put a gold star on it and everything." "That's amazing, Soph." Ethan knelt down, pulling her into a proper hug. She smelled like crayons and playground mulch, and something indefinably sweet. "I'm so proud of you." "Can we celebrate?" Sophie pulled back, her eyes bright with hope. "Maybe get pizza? Or ice cream? Or how about spaghetti?" Ethan kept his voice light, playful. "Your favorite. I'll even let you put extra cheese on it." He watched her calibrate her disappointment, watched her decide to be brave. "Okay," Sophie said, squeezing his hand. "Spaghetti's good too. Can I help cook?" "Absolutely." They walked home hand in hand, Sophie chattering about her day, the math test she'd aced, the boy who'd pulled her hair at recess, the art project they were starting next week. Ethan listened and responded and tried not to calculate how many more times they could have spaghetti before even that ran out. Their apartment building loomed ahead, 3 stories of crumbling brick and broken dreams. The elevator hadn't worked in months. They climbed to the 2nd floor, Ethan's legs heavier with each step. Inside their apartment, the afternoon light filtered through curtains that had come with the place. Thin, yellowed, inadequate. The space was small. 1 bedroom that Sophie had, a living room where Ethan slept on a futon, a kitchen barely big enough for 1 person. But it had been theirs, safe, home. Now it was just another thing about to be taken away. "I'll get the pasta." Sophie dropped her backpack and ran to the kitchen. Ethan followed more slowly, pulling the half box of spaghetti from the cabinet and the questionable butter from the fridge. They cooked together, Sophie standing on a chair to stir the pot, while Ethan supervised and made encouraging comments. This was their ritual, the one piece of normalcy they'd managed to preserve. In the kitchen, they were okay. In the kitchen, they were still a family. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice went quiet. "Are you okay?" Ethan looked at his daughter, 8 years old and already learning to read his silences. "I'm perfect, Soph. Why do you ask?" "You seem sad sometimes, when you think I'm not looking." She kept stirring, her small hands gripping the spoon too tight. "Is it because of Mommy?" The question landed like a physical blow. Ethan steadied himself against the counter. They didn't talk about Sarah much. The grief was still too sharp, even 2 years later. The accident, the hospital, the impossibly fast progression from "she'll be okay" to "there's nothing more we can do." "Sometimes," Ethan said honestly, "but mostly I'm okay, especially when I'm with you." "Me too," Sophie whispered. Then louder, "The pasta's ready." They ate at their small table, Sophie talking enough for both of them. Ethan tried to eat slowly to make the small portion feel like more, but his stomach gnawed at him mercilessly. He gave Sophie most of his serving when she wasn't looking, scraping it onto her plate while she told him about the book they were reading in class. After dinner, they sat on the futon and Sophie did her homework while Ethan pretended to read a book from the library. Really, he was calculating. 3 days until rent was due, 6 days until the unemployment check might arrive, a half box of pasta and some butter left. Maybe some rice. Maybe. "All done." Sophie held up her math worksheet triumphantly. "Can we read together?" They read until Sophie's eyes started drooping, until she was leaning heavy against his shoulder. Ethan carried her to bed, their bed technically, though he'd been sleeping on the futon since they'd moved in. She was getting bigger, harder to carry, but he never mentioned it. These moments were numbered. Soon she'd be too old for bedtime stories and goodnight hugs. "Love you, Daddy," Sophie mumbled, already half asleep. "Love you more, Soph." He closed her door and stood in the narrow hallway, listening to her breathing even out. This was what mattered. Not the job, not the money, not the humiliation or the hunger or the eviction notice. Just this. Keeping her safe, keeping her fed, keeping her from knowing how close to the edge they really were. Ethan returned to the living room and pulled out the eviction notice. 3 days. $1,700. Might as well be 17 million. He had no family to call, no friends left after spending 2 years caring for Sarah and then another 2 years just trying to survive. His parents were gone. Sarah's family had cut ties after the funeral, blamed him somehow for not preventing the unpreventable. He was alone. The night stretched ahead, empty and accusing. Ethan lay on the futon, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and tried not to think about the $20 he'd given away that morning, tried not to calculate what it could have bought, tried not to feel like the stupidest, most pathetic man alive. But the memory wouldn't leave him alone. Lena Hartwell's face, that moment of genuine mortification, the way her polished exterior had cracked to reveal something almost human underneath. The woman who'd fired him, who'd destroyed his life with a signature. The woman he'd saved from embarrassment with his last $20. Somewhere across the city, she was probably already in bed in some expensive apartment, her credit card issue resolved, his kindness forgotten. It had probably meant nothing to her, a minor inconvenience in a day full of more important concerns. And here he was, staring at the ceiling, wondering how to explain to an 8-year-old that they'd have to leave their home. Ethan closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd figure something out. Tomorrow he'd find a solution. Tomorrow he'd be the father Sophie deserved. Tomorrow. For now, he just had to survive the night. The morning came too early and too cold. Ethan woke to frost on the windows and Sophie's alarm clock blaring from her room. He forced himself upright, every muscle protesting, and started the coffee maker with the last of their grounds. Black coffee, no sugar, no milk, just bitter fuel. "Daddy!" Sophie appeared in her pajamas, hair a wild tangle. "It's cold." "I know, baby. The heat's being weird again." Not weird, shut off, because he'd missed last month's utility payment. But Sophie didn't need to know that. "Let's get you dressed warm, okay?" They went through their morning routine in a kind of desperate choreography. Ethan made Sophie oatmeal with the last of the instant packets, using water because the milk was gone. She ate without complaint, chattering about the spelling test she had today, the one she'd studied so hard for. You're going to do amazing, Ethan said, helping her into her jacket. Too thin for the weather, but it was all they had. Will you be here when I get home? The question stopped him. Of course. Where else would I be? I don't know. Sophie looked down. Sometimes I worry you'll leave too, like Mommy did. Ethan knelt in front of her, taking her small face in his hands. Sophie, listen to me. I'm not going anywhere. Ever. I promise. Okay? Okay. She hugged him tight, and Ethan felt something crack in his chest. He couldn't let her down. Couldn't let this apartment, this life, this fragile stability slip away. He'd do whatever it took. Whatever it took. They walked to school together, Ethan making jokes and silly faces until Sophie was laughing again. At the school gates, she hugged him one more time and ran inside, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Ethan watched until she disappeared. Then he turned and started walking. Not toward the library this time. Not toward another day of futile job applications. Toward downtown. Toward Hartwell Industries. He wasn't even sure what he was doing until he was standing across the street from the building where he'd once worked. It looked exactly the same, glass and steel, modern and imposing, a monument to corporate success. The people streaming through the entrance looked the same too, confident, purposeful, carrying their expensive coffee and their expensive lives. Ethan had been one of them once, in a different lifetime, before Sarah got sick. Before he'd given up his engineering career to be her caretaker, then Sophie's sole parent. Before he'd taken the maintenance job because it had regular hours and decent pay, and didn't require explaining the gap in his resume. Before everything had fallen apart. He stood there for a long time watching. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Answers, maybe. Some kind of closure. Proof that he'd existed here, that his termination hadn't just erased him from reality. A black town car pulled up to the entrance. The driver emerged and opened the rear door. Lena Hartwell stepped out. Ethan's breath caught. She looked exactly as she had yesterday morning, polished, professional, utterly composed. She spoke briefly to her driver, then turned toward the building entrance, and froze. Her eyes locked on Ethan across the street. Even from this distance, he saw the recognition hit her, not the vague, almost knowing from yesterday, but full, complete understanding. She knew who he was. Time seemed to slow. Lena stood perfectly still, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, and something that looked almost like horror. Her hand came up to her mouth. She said something to her driver, gestured toward Ethan. He turned and walked away. Didn't run. Didn't hurry. Just walked, with what remained of his dignity intact. Behind him, he heard her voice call out, "Wait, please!" But Ethan kept walking faster now, putting distance between himself and that building, that life, that woman who held all the power, and he had none. He walked until his legs burned and his empty stomach cramped. He walked until downtown became midtown, became the industrial district. He walked until the anger burning in his chest finally cooled to something harder, something he could carry. The woman who'd fired him now knew he'd helped her. Somehow, that made everything worse. Ethan's apartment felt smaller when he returned, the walls pressing in with the weight of everything unsaid. He'd walked for hours, circling through neighborhoods he couldn't afford to live in anymore, past restaurants where families ate without calculating every dollar, through parks where children played with the kind of carefree abandon Sophie was slowly losing. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. Ethan stared at it, debating, then let it go to voicemail. Probably a collections agency. They'd been calling more frequently lately, their voices progressively less sympathetic as his debts mounted. The phone buzzed again immediately. Same number. Then again. On the fourth call, Ethan answered. "Hello? Mr. Brooks?" The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Jessica Chen from Hartwell Industries. Ms. Hartwell has been trying to reach you. She'd like to—" Ethan ended the call. His hand was shaking. The phone rang again. He turned it off completely, shoved it into his pocket, and stood in the middle of his empty living room, breathing hard. What did she want? To apologize? To explain? To make herself feel better about the kindness she'd received from the man she'd destroyed? None of it would change anything. Apologies didn't pay rent. Regret didn't feed Sophie. The afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. Ethan tried to focus on job applications, but his mind kept drifting back to that moment on the street. Lena Hartwell's expression shifting from recognition to horror. The way she'd called out to him. The desperation in her voice. Good. Let her feel desperate. Let her understand what it was like. But the satisfaction he'd expected didn't come. Instead, he just felt hollow. At 3 o'clock, Ethan walked to Madison Elementary. He arrived early again, sitting on the same bench, watching parents gather at the gates. They looked so normal, so unburdened. He wondered if any of them were one paycheck away from homelessness, if any of them were rationing food, if any of them had given their last $20 to a stranger who'd ruined their life. The bell rang. Sophie emerged with her usual enthusiasm, spotted him, and ran over with her backpack flying. "Daddy, I got 100 on my spelling test!" She waved the paper in his face. The red 100 circled with a smiley face. "That's incredible, Soph." Ethan swept her into a hug, letting her joy fill some of the emptiness. "I knew you'd ace it. Can we celebrate?" The hope in her voice was careful, measured. She was learning not to ask for too much. "Absolutely. How about we make that spaghetti extra special tonight?" Sophie's face fell slightly, then recovered. "Okay, can I help?" "Always." They walked home together, Sophie recounting every question on the test and how she'd remembered the tricky words. Ethan listened and responded and tried not to think about the fact that they were down to a quarter box of pasta and no butter. He'd have to get creative tonight. Inside their apartment, Sophie dropped her backpack and headed straight for the kitchen. "I'll get the pot." "Actually, Soph," Ethan said carefully, "why don't you start your homework first? I'll get dinner ready." "But I always help." "I know, baby. But you worked so hard on that test, you deserve a break." He ruffled her hair. "Go on, I'll call you when it's ready." Sophie hesitated, that too perceptive look in her eyes, then nodded and retreated to her room. Ethan waited until her door closed before opening the kitchen cabinet. The pasta box was lighter than he'd remembered, maybe enough for one small portion. The rice container was nearly empty too. He checked the fridge. Nothing. The freezer. Nothing. The other cabinets yielded a can of tomato sauce that was probably expired and a sleeve of crackers. This was it. This was all the food they had. Ethan leaned against the counter, pressing his palms against his eyes. 2 days until the rent was due. Maybe 4 days until the unemployment check arrived. No food, no money, no options. His phone, still turned off, felt like a lead weight in his pocket. He cooked the remaining pasta with the tomato sauce, divided it onto 2 plates with the crackers on the side. Sophie's portion was larger. His was barely enough to be called a meal. When he called her out, she looked at the plates and frowned. "Aren't you hungry, Daddy?" "I had a big lunch," Ethan lied smoothly. "Eat up. You need energy for that brain of yours." They ate in relative silence, Sophie too tired from her day to chatter as much as usual. Ethan chewed slowly, making each bite last, trying to convince his stomach that this was enough. After dinner, Sophie did more homework while Ethan washed the dishes, all 3 of them, the sum total of their meal. His hands moved automatically, scrubbing the same plate multiple times because it gave him something to do other than confront the reality closing in around them. "Daddy?" Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Can we read tonight?" "Of course." Ethan dried his hands. "Go pick a book." They settled on the futon together, Sophie tucked against his side. She'd chosen one of her favorites, a story about a girl who discovered she was secretly a princess. Ethan read aloud, doing all the voices the way Sophie liked, watching her eyes grow heavy. "Daddy?" she murmured, halfway through the story. "Hmm? If you were secretly something else, what would you be?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Like the girl in the story. She's really a princess, but nobody knows." Sophie looked up at him with those serious eyes. "What would you be?" Ethan thought about the engineering degree gathering dust in a storage unit he could no longer afford. The designs he'd created, the problems he'd solved, the career he'd abandoned to take care of the people he loved. The person he'd been before grief had reshaped him into someone smaller, quieter, invisible. "I don't know, Soph," he said softly. "Maybe just someone who could give you everything you deserve." "But you already do that." Sophie hugged him tighter. "You're the best daddy in the whole world." The words hit him like a physical blow. Ethan held his daughter close, blinking hard against the burning in his eyes. She believed that. She actually believed that he was enough, that he was doing okay, that they were fine. She had no idea how badly he was failing her. "Love you, Soph," he whispered. "Love you more." He carried her to bed when she fell asleep mid-story, tucked her in, and stood in the doorway watching her breathe. In sleep, she looked so peaceful, so unaware of the disaster looming over them. Ethan wanted to preserve that innocence, that peace, more than he'd ever wanted anything, but he didn't know how much longer he could. Back in the living room, Ethan turned his phone back on. The screen lit up with notifications. 17 missed calls from the same Hartwell Industries number, plus 3 voicemails. His thumb hovered over the delete button. But something stopped him. Curiosity, maybe. Or desperation. Or just the hollow exhaustion of someone who'd run out of better options. He played the first voicemail. "Mr. Brooks, this is Jessica Chen again from Hartwell Industries. Ms. Hartwell really needs to speak with you. It's extremely important. Please call back at..." Delete. Second voicemail. "Mr. Brooks, please. Ms. Hartwell has asked me to convey that this is urgent. She'd like to discuss your termination. There were circumstances that warrant conversation. Please." Ethan's finger froze over the delete button. Circumstances that warrant a conversation? What did that mean? Third voicemail. This one wasn't from Jessica Chen. "Mr. Brooks? Ethan, this is Lena Hartwell." Her voice was different than he remembered, less polished, more raw. "I saw you this morning. I recognized you. And I need to talk to you about what happened. Please. I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything. But please call me back. This number will reach me directly." The voicemail ended. Ethan stared at his phone, his heart pounding. She'd recognized him. She knew. And now she wanted to talk about his termination? He should delete it. Should block the number. Should maintain what little dignity he had left and refuse to give her the satisfaction of his attention. But if there were circumstances, if there was something about his termination that warranted discussion, if there was even the smallest possibility that... No. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what got you hurt. Ethan set the phone down and lay back on the futon, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Outside, the city hummed with its indifferent life. Somewhere out there, Lena Hartwell was probably in her expensive apartment, waiting for a call from the janitor she'd fired, the man who'd given her his last $20. Let her wait. But sleep wouldn't come. His mind spun in useless circles, replaying that morning's encounter, her expression of recognition, her voicemail. The eviction notice seemed to burn through his pocket, even though he'd left it on the kitchen counter. At some point past midnight, exhaustion finally dragged him under into restless dreams of endless hallways and closed doors, and Sophie's voice calling for him from somewhere he couldn't reach. Morning arrived with gray light and the realization that he'd slept through his alarm. Ethan jerked awake, his heart racing, and checked the time. 7:15. Sophie needed to be at school by 8. "Soph!" He knocked on her door. "Time to get up, baby." "Already up, Daddy?" She emerged fully dressed, her hair attempted into some kind of ponytail. "I got ready myself." Pride and guilt twisted together in Ethan's chest. "Look at you. When did you get so grown up?" "I'm 8 3/4, Sophie said seriously, as if that explained everything. "What's for breakfast?" "Breakfast." "Right." Ethan went to the kitchen and stared at their remaining food. Crackers. Just crackers. He grabbed the sleeve and brought it out with 2 glasses of water. "Crackers for breakfast?" Sophie's eyebrows rose. "Are we having a picnic?" "Exactly," Ethan said, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. "An indoor picnic. Very fancy." Sophie giggled and ate her crackers without complaint, chattering about the art project they were starting today. Ethan nibbled on 2 crackers, drinking water to fill his stomach, and tried not to think about lunch or dinner or the complete absence of any plan. They walked to school together, arriving just as the bell rang. Sophie hugged him goodbye and ran inside, her backpack bouncing. Ethan watched her go, that familiar ache expanding in his chest. Then he pulled out his phone and stared at Lena Hartwell's number. His thumb hovered over the call button. Pride said to ignore it. Dignity said to walk away. Self-respect said she'd made her choice when she'd signed his termination papers. But Sophie's empty stomach said something different. Ethan pressed call before he could change his mind. The phone rang once, twice. Then, "Ethan?" Lena Hartwell's voice came through immediately, breathless, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Thank you for calling. Thank you. Can we meet, please? I need to talk to you in person." "I don't think that's a good idea," Ethan said. His voice came out flat, emotionless. "Please, just hear me out. 30 minutes. That's all I'm asking." A pause. "I owe you at least that much." You don't owe me anything." The words tasted bitter. "You paid your debt when you destroyed my career." Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "I know, and I need to explain. There are things you don't know. Things I didn't know until yesterday. Please, Ethan, 30 minutes. Name the place." Ethan closed his eyes. This was stupid. This was going to end badly. But desperation made people do stupid things, and he was running out of time. "The coffee shop on Moreau Street," he heard himself say. 1 hour. "I'll be there. Thank you." He ended the call before she could finish. His hand was shaking again. What was he doing? What did he possibly think would come from this? But he was already walking downtown, his empty stomach cramping with each step, his mind racing through possibilities he couldn't afford to entertain. The coffee shop appeared ahead, its windows fogged with morning warmth. Ethan stopped outside, gathering himself, then pushed through the door. The same barista from 2 days ago looked up and smiled in recognition. "Hey, you're the guy who—" She stopped, seeming to realize that finishing that sentence might be awkward. "What can I get you?" "Just water, please," Ethan said. "On the house." She slid him a large cup. "That was really kind, what you did. I hope that lady paid you back." "Working on it," Ethan muttered, taking the water to a corner table. He sat facing the door, sipping his water slowly to make it last, watching people come and go with their complicated drinks and their uncomplicated lives. The minutes crawled by. Maybe she wouldn't show. Maybe she'd realize this was a waste of her valuable time. The door opened. Lena Hartwell stepped inside. She looked different than she had the previous morning. Still professional, tailored pants, silk blouse, expensive coat. But something in her bearing had changed. She looked uncertain, almost nervous. Their eyes met across the coffee shop. Lena approached slowly as if afraid he might bolt. "Thank you for coming," she said, stopping a few feet from his table. May I sit?" Ethan gestured to the empty chair. Lena sat carefully, setting her purse aside, her hands folding on the table. Up close, he could see faint shadows under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept well. "Good." "I don't know where to start," Lena said finally, "except with an apology. What happened to you was wrong, completely wrong, and I'm responsible." "You signed the termination papers," Ethan said flatly. "I know, I saw your signature." "I did, but I didn't know—" She stopped, took a breath. "After I saw you yesterday morning, I couldn't stop thinking about how I knew your face. It took me hours to place you. The maintenance worker who always smiled, who fixed things quietly and never complained, who—" Her voice cracked slightly. "Who I fired 3 weeks ago for theft. I didn't steal anything." The words came out harder than Ethan intended. "I know." Lena met his eyes. "I know that now. Yesterday, after I recognized you, I went back to the office and I pulled your entire file. I watched the security footage myself. I read every email, every report, every piece of evidence that supposedly proved your guilt." Ethan's heart was pounding. And it was manufactured. Lena's hands clenched on the table. All of it. The security footage was edited. The reports were falsified. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to frame you, and She looked away, her jaw tight. "I signed off on your termination without doing my due diligence. I trusted the people I shouldn't have trusted, and you paid the price." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan's mind was reeling, trying to process what she was saying. Manufactured, edited, framed. Why? His voice came out raw. Why would anyone? I was a janitor. I fixed things. I didn't even work near the research division except to clean. That's exactly why, Lena interrupted. You were invisible, the perfect scapegoat, and the person who framed you knew exactly what they were doing. Who? Lena's expression hardened. Marcus Chen, head of our security division. He's been selling proprietary information to our competitors for the past 2 years. When internal auditing started getting close, he needed a fall guy. You were convenient. Marcus Chen. Ethan remembered him vaguely. A man in his 50s who'd always treated the maintenance staff like furniture, who'd walked past them in hallways as if they didn't exist. He stole the drive, Lena continued, and he made sure you were blamed for it. The security footage shows you leaving the building at exactly the right time, carrying something that could have been the drive. Except when I enhanced the footage, really enhanced it, with proper equipment, I could see the timestamp had been altered. You were leaving 30 minutes earlier than the logs claimed, with your lunch bag. My lunch bag, Ethan repeated numbly. Marcus edited the footage to make it look like you were leaving with the drive. He filed the initial theft report. He pushed for your immediate termination without investigation. And Lena's voice broke. I let it happen. I signed the papers because I was busy, because I trusted my security chief, because I didn't think to question whether a maintenance worker might be innocent. The coffee shop noise faded to white static. Ethan stared at this woman who'd destroyed his life, who was now telling him it had all been a mistake, a frame job, a convenient lie. 3 weeks, he said quietly. I've had nothing for 3 weeks. No job, no money, no food. I gave you my last $20, money I needed to feed my daughter, and you had no idea who I was. Lena flinched as if he'd struck her. I know, and I can never. There's no apology big enough for what you've been through, but I want to make it right. I need to make it right. How? Ethan's voice rose despite himself. How do you make right the fact that I'm 2 days from being evicted? That my 8-year-old daughter thinks crackers for breakfast is a fun picnic because I can't tell her we have no food? That I've spent 3 weeks thinking I was a thief? That everyone I worked with thought I was a thief? That you destroyed my reputation with a signature? You're right. Tears were forming in Lena's eyes, but she didn't look away. You're absolutely right. And I don't expect forgiveness. But I can offer restitution, your job back with full back pay, a formal apology to your record, a correction of everything that was done to you. I don't want my maintenance job back. The words came out before Ethan had fully formed the thought. Lena stopped. Then what do you want? What did he want? Ethan's mind spun. A week ago, he'd have taken anything, any job, any paycheck, any lifeline. But now, sitting across from the woman who'd casually erased him, listening to her offer to restore a position he'd only taken out of desperation. I want what I was before all of this, Ethan said quietly. Before my wife got sick. Before I had to give up everything to take care of her and then Sophie. Before I became invisible. What were you? Lena asked gently. An engineer. The word felt foreign in his mouth, like a language he'd forgotten. Mechanical engineering, MIT graduate. I worked on renewable energy systems, designed components for wind turbines. I had patents. I had a career. He laughed bitterly. Then Sarah got cancer, and someone had to be there. Someone had to take her to treatments and hold her hand and pretend everything would be okay. Someone had to raise our daughter when she didn't make it. So I became that someone, and the engineer disappeared. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Your resume, she said finally. When HR processed your maintenance application, did it show your engineering degree? No. There was a 10-year gap I couldn't explain without talking about Sarah's illness and death. I thought, Ethan's throat tightened. I thought it would be easier to just apply as someone with no expectations, someone who just needed steady work and normal hours. You were overqualified for a maintenance position. I was desperate for any position that let me see my daughter at night. Lena nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. The preliminary designs you submitted for the wind turbine component, the ones Marcus claimed were stolen. Ethan frowned. What designs? I never submitted any designs. No. Lena pulled out her phone, scrolled through something, then turned it toward him. But you created them. These were on the drive Marcus stole. He claimed he'd caught you copying proprietary research. But these aren't our designs. Ethan looked at the screen, his breath caught. The designs were his, from years ago, from his previous life. Theoretical work he'd done on improved blade pitch systems, innovations that could increase turbine efficiency by 15%. Work he'd never finished, never published, never even thought about after Sarah got sick. Where did these come from? His voice was barely a whisper. That's what I need to find out, Lena said. But Ethan, these designs are extraordinary, innovative, exactly the kind of breakthrough our renewable energy division has been chasing for 2 years. If someone has access to more of your work, no one has access. Ethan's mind was reeling. That was all on my personal computer, in storage. How would Marcus even... He stopped. The storage unit. The one he'd stopped paying for 6 months ago, when money had gotten too tight. They'd auctioned his belongings, including his computer, all his files, years of research and designs, and the remnants of his previous life. Someone bought your work, Lena said, reading his expression. And Marcus somehow got his hands on it. He's been selling it piece by piece to our competitors, claiming it was our internal research. The magnitude of it hit Ethan like a wave. Not only had Marcus framed him for theft, he'd been profiting off Ethan's own designs, using his work, his innovations, his years of training and talent to line his own pockets while destroying the man who'd created it all. I want him arrested, Ethan said quietly. I want him prosecuted. I want everyone to know what he did. He will be, Lena promised. I've already contacted our legal team and the police. Marcus was placed on administrative leave yesterday afternoon. By tomorrow, he'll be facing formal charges. Good. But the satisfaction Ethan expected still didn't come, just more emptiness. There's something else, Lena said carefully. Your designs, the full portfolio, if we can recover it, it's worth millions. To our company, to our competitors, to the renewable energy sector. If you were to continue that work, develop it further. She paused. I'm not offering you a maintenance position, Ethan. I'm offering you a chance to be who you were supposed to be. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and pain. Who he was supposed to be. As if the last decade hadn't happened. As if Sarah hadn't died and Sophie didn't need a father who came home at regular hours, and grief hadn't reshaped him into someone smaller, quieter, more careful. I have a daughter, Ethan said. She's 8. She needs stability, not a father who works 80-hour weeks on breakthrough innovations. Then don't work 80 hours. Lena leaned forward. Name your terms, your hours, your conditions. What you need to be both the engineer you were and the father you are. It was everything he'd thought he'd lost, everything he'd grieved. But he'd learned something in the years of Sarah's illness and Sophie's childhood. He'd learned that brilliance meant nothing if you weren't there for the people you loved. That career success was hollow if you missed bedtime stories and spelling tests and the small moments that made up a life. He'd learned that the measure of a man wasn't what he created, but who he showed up for. I need time, Ethan said finally. To think. To figure out what I actually want. Of course. Lena pulled out a business card, wrote something on the back, and slid it across the table. That's my personal cell. Call me when you're ready. No pressure. No timeline. She paused. And Ethan, regardless of what you decide about the job, your back pay starts immediately. You're owed 3 weeks of salary plus compensation for wrongful termination. That money will be in your account by end of business today. Ethan stared at the card, at the elegant handwriting, at the lifeline being offered. Why? He asked. Why do you care? You didn't know me 2 days ago. You signed my termination without a second thought. What changed? Lena's expression shifted into something raw and honest. You gave me $20 when I had nothing. You didn't have to. You certainly couldn't afford to. But you did it anyway, without expectation or judgment or any awareness that I was the person who destroyed your life. She met his eyes. That kind of character, that kind of fundamental decency is rarer than any engineering innovation. And I realized that I'd built a company that destroyed good people because they were convenient. because they were invisible. I want to build something better. And I want to start by making this right. They sat in silence. Around them, the coffee shop continued its morning rhythm. Orders called, coffee brewing, lives progressing forward. I need to pick up my daughter from school, Ethan said finally, standing. His legs felt unsteady. Of course, Lena stood as well. Thank you for meeting with me, for listening, for not walking away. I almost did, Ethan admitted. I wouldn't have blamed you. He nodded and turned toward the door, then stopped. The $20, he said without looking back. You don't owe me that either. But if you insist on paying it back, donate it to the homeless shelter on 5th or the food bank, somewhere that helps people who are where I was 3 weeks ago. I will, Lena said quietly. But Ethan, people like you, people who give their last $20 to strangers, they don't stay down for long, even when the world tries to keep them there. Ethan left the coffee shop without responding. Outside, the morning had turned bright and cold, the city gleaming under weak winter sun. He walked slowly, his mind spinning through everything Lena had said. Manufactured evidence, a frame job, his own design stolen and sold, the possibility of restoration, redemption, return. And underneath it all, the terrifying question, who was he now, really? The engineer he'd been? The father he'd become? Some combination of both that he hadn't figured out yet? His phone buzzed. A notification from his bank. Deposit, 8,400. Ethan stopped walking, stared at his screen. That was more than his quarterly maintenance salary had been. Way more. He opened the transaction details. Hartwell Industries, back pay plus compensation. It was real. The money was real. He wasn't being evicted. Sophie could eat. They could stay in their apartment. They could breathe. Ethan stood on the sidewalk and felt something break open in his chest. Not grief this time, but something almost worse. Hope. Fragile, terrifying, dangerous hope. He spent the rest of the morning in a daze, walking without direction, trying to process the seismic shift in his circumstances. By early afternoon, he found himself at the supermarket, standing in the entrance with his phone showing that impossible number. Inside, families shopped normally, carelessly, tossing items into carts without checking prices or calculating every dollar. Ethan walked through the aisles slowly, picking up items he hadn't been able to afford in weeks. Fresh fruit, real bread, chicken, vegetables, milk, cheese, all the things that made a house feel like a home. At checkout, the total came to $73, a fortune 2 days ago, pocket change now. Ethan paid without flinching, carried his bags out into the cold afternoon, and felt tears burning in his eyes. Sophie would have real dinner tonight, a proper meal. She wouldn't have to pretend crackers were a special picnic. She wouldn't have to be brave about her disappointment. He walked to Madison Elementary with grocery bags in both hands, arriving early to sit on his usual bench. The weight of the food felt good, solid, real, evidence that maybe, possibly, things could be okay. The bell rang, children poured out. Sophie emerged, spotted him, and her face lit up in that way that always made his chest ache. "Daddy!" She ran over, then stopped, staring at the grocery bags. "What's all that?" "Dinner," Ethan said, smiling for real this time. "Real dinner. Whatever you want." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Anything?" "Anything. Can we have chicken?" The hope in her voice was almost painful. "With vegetables? And maybe dessert?" "Absolutely." Ethan stood, gathering his bags. "And Soph? Things are going to be okay now, I promise." She looked up at him with those serious eyes, searching his face for truth. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she grabbed his hand and squeezed tight. "I knew you'd figure it out," she said simply. "You always do." They walked home together through the cold afternoon, Sophie chattering about her day, while Ethan carried groceries that felt like hope, like possibility, like the universe finally remembering they existed. But that night, after Sophie was asleep with a full belly and a smile on her face, after the dishes were done and the leftovers safely stored, Ethan sat on his futon and pulled out Lena Hartwell's card. The money solved their immediate crisis. But it didn't answer the bigger question: who was he going to be now? The father who played it safe, or the engineer who'd once believed he could change the world? He didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in 3 weeks, he had the luxury of time to figure it out. The card sat on Ethan's makeshift nightstand for 3 days, its edges catching the morning light each time he woke. He'd pick it up, turn it over in his hands, trace the embossed lettering of Lena Hartwell's name, then set it back down without calling. Sophie noticed his distraction, but said nothing, too absorbed in the miracle of full meals and the reprieve from his constant worry to question what came next. On the 4th morning, Ethan woke to find Sophie already dressed for school, sitting at their small table with a drawing spread before her. She was sketching something elaborate, her tongue poking out in concentration the way Sarah's used to when she was focused. "What are you working on?" Ethan asked, moving to the kitchen to start breakfast. "Real breakfast, eggs and toast and orange juice." "An invention," Sophie said seriously, not looking up from her paper. "For science class. We have to draw something that could help people." Ethan cracked eggs into the pan, listening to them sizzle. "What kind of invention?" "A machine that finds lost things." Sophie held up her drawing, a complicated contraption with arrows and labels in her careful 8-year-old handwriting. "Like when people lose their keys or their phone or their—" She paused, her voice dropping. "Or their jobs." The spatula stilled in Ethan's hand. He turned to look at his daughter, really look at her. She was staring at her drawing with an intensity that had nothing to do with school projects. "Soph," he said gently, "come here." She climbed off her chair and came to him, small and serious. Ethan knelt down to her level. "You knew, didn't you? About the food. About how bad things were." Sophie nodded, her eyes filling with tears she was trying hard not to shed. "I heard you crying one night, after I was supposed to be asleep, and I know crackers aren't really a special picnic, and I know we stopped using heat because you said it was broken, but I think maybe we just couldn't pay for it, and I—" Her voice cracked. "I wanted to help, but I didn't know how." Ethan pulled her into his arms, his own throat tight. "Oh, baby. You helped just by being you, by being brave and strong and understanding when you shouldn't have had to be." "Are things really okay now?" Sophie whispered against his shoulder. "Or are you just pretending again?" The question cut straight through him. How many times had he lied with a smile? How many times had he said everything was fine when nothing was fine? He'd thought he was protecting her, but children always knew. They always felt the weight their parents tried to hide. "Things are really okay," Ethan said, pulling back to meet her eyes. "I promise. We have money again. We can keep our apartment. You can have real meals every day. And I—" He paused, realizing he was about to make a decision he hadn't fully processed yet. "I might have a chance at a new job. A better one." "Doing what?" "Something I used to do a long time ago, before you were born. Something I was good at." Sophie wiped her eyes. "Will you have to work all the time, like the kids at school whose parents are never home?" And there it was, the question that had been keeping him awake, the reason he hadn't called Lena back. Sophie had already lost her mother. She'd already spent 3 weeks watching her father barely hold himself together. How could he risk becoming the kind of parent who was physically present but emotionally absent, consumed by work and ambition? "No," Ethan said firmly. "I'll never do that to you. Whatever I decide, you come first, always." "Okay." Sophie hugged him again, tighter this time. "I just want you to be happy, Daddy. You seem sad a lot." "I'm getting there, Soph, I promise." They finished breakfast together, Sophie chattering about her invention project while Ethan scrambled eggs and tried not to think about how close they'd come to losing everything. After he dropped Sophie at school, he walked to the public library, not to apply for jobs this time, but to use their computers for research. He pulled up his old work. The designs he'd created years ago, before Sarah got sick, before grief had redirected his entire life. Seeing them on screen felt like encountering a stranger, someone brilliant and ambitious and completely removed from who he'd become. But as Ethan studied the designs, something shifted. He began to see not just what he'd created, but what he could improve. His mind started working in ways it hadn't in years, identifying inefficiencies, imagining solutions, building on foundations he'd laid a decade ago. The work wasn't foreign. It was dormant, waiting. A librarian passed by and paused. That looks complicated. Ethan glanced up, almost embarrassed to be caught so absorbed. Engineering designs. Renewable energy systems. Are you an engineer? The question hung in the air. Was he? Or had he given up that right when he'd chosen Sophie over his career, maintenance work over innovation? I was, Ethan said finally, trying to figure out if I still am. The librarian smiled. My daughter's an engineer. She took 10 years off to raise her kids. When she went back, her boss asked if she was rusty. You know what she said? Ethan shook his head. She said, I spent a decade solving problems with limited resources, no budget, and no recognition. I'm the most qualified engineer in this building. The librarian patted his shoulder. Whatever you're deciding, good luck. She walked away, leaving Ethan staring at his designs with new perspective. The last 10 years hadn't been a waste. They taught him things no university could: how to work with nothing, how to prioritize what mattered, how to keep going when everything felt impossible. Maybe those were exactly the skills that made someone not just a good engineer, but a great one. Ethan pulled out his phone and called Lena's number before he could overthink it. She answered on the first ring. Ethan? I want to see the facility, he said. Your renewable energy division. I want to understand what you're working on before I make any decisions. Of course. When? Today. This afternoon. After I pick up my daughter from school, I'll need to Bring her, Lena interrupted. Bring Sophie. We have a childcare center on site for employees. She can play there while we talk, or she can tour the facility with us if she'd prefer. Whatever works for you. The offer caught Ethan off guard. He'd expected professional boundaries, scheduled meetings, the kind of corporate formality that kept work and family in separate boxes. You're sure? Ethan, if you come work for me, and I very much hope you will, Sophie is part of that equation. I need to understand what you both need to make this work. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the library for a long time, trying to process what was happening. 3 days ago, he'd been rationing crackers. Now a CEO was inviting his daughter to tour a corporate facility. The whiplash was almost dizzying. That afternoon, Ethan picked Sophie up from school with news that made her eyes go wide. We're going where? She asked, clutching his hand as they walked. To a company that makes machines for renewable energy. They want to show us around. Why? Because I might work there, and they want to meet you. Sophie processed this information with her characteristic seriousness. Will there be cool stuff to see? Probably pretty cool stuff. Okay then. They took the bus downtown. Ethan could afford the fare now, could afford lots of things, but the habit of frugality was hard to break. Hartwell Industries loomed ahead, all glass and steel and intimidating corporate presence. Ethan's steps slowed as they approached. Daddy? Sophie squeezed his hand. You're nervous. A little bit. You'll be great. She said it with such simple confidence that Ethan almost believed her. The lobby was exactly as he remembered. Polished floors, modern furniture, a reception desk staffed by professionals in sharp blazers. Ethan had mopped these floors a month ago, had emptied trash bins and cleaned windows while invisible to everyone passing through. Now he walked through the entrance with his daughter's hand in his, and people looked at him, really looked. Mr. Brooks? The receptionist smiled warmly. Ms. Hartwell is expecting you, and this must be Sophie. Hi, Sophie said shyly. Hi yourself. We have coloring books and puzzles in the children's area upstairs, and our cafeteria has really good cookies. I like cookies, Sophie admitted. The receptionist laughed and made a quick call. Moments later, Lena Hartwell emerged from the elevators, dressed more casually than Ethan had seen her, slacks and a sweater, her hair pulled back simply. She looked approachable, almost normal. Ethan, thank you for coming. Lena turned to Sophie with a genuine smile. And you must be Sophie. I've heard wonderful things about you. From who? Sophie asked, curious rather than suspicious. From your dad. He says you're the smartest second grader in your school. Third grade, Sophie corrected. I'm 8 3/4. My apologies, third grade. Lena held out her hand, treating Sophie with the same courtesy she'd give an adult. Sophie shook it solemnly. They rode the elevator to the 5th floor, where the Renewable Energy Division occupied an entire wing. Glass walls revealed labs and testing areas, engineers clustered around computer screens, prototypes in various stages of development. "This is where we work on wind turbine innovation," Lena explained as they walked. "Efficiency improvements, noise reduction, materials research. We've made good progress, but we've hit a ceiling on blade pitch optimization. The designs your work hinted at could push us past that ceiling." Ethan studied the space, his engineer's mind automatically cataloging equipment, noting workflows, identifying potential bottlenecks. "You're using static modeling for stress testing?" "Yes. Is that a problem?" "It's limited. Dynamic modeling would give you better real-world data." He caught himself. "Sorry, I'm not even employed here yet, and I'm already critiquing your methods." "Don't apologize. That's exactly what I need. Someone who sees what we're missing." Lena led them into a conference room where design schematics covered the walls. "This is our current project. We're trying to increase energy capture by 12%. We've been stuck at 8 for 6 months. Ethan approached the wall, studying the designs. His fingers traced the blade specifications, the pitch angle calculations, the power curve projections. He could see the problem immediately. They were optimizing for the wrong variable. "You're focused on angle adjustment speed," he said, half to himself. "But the real efficiency loss is in the transition phase. The blades spend too much time in suboptimal positions during wind speed changes. If you could predict wind patterns even 2 seconds ahead, you could pre-adjust." He stopped, realizing both Lena and Sophie were staring at him. "Sorry," Ethan said again. "I got carried away." "Don't stop." Lena moved closer to the wall. "You just identified something my entire team has missed for 6 months. Keep going." "Can I?" Ethan gestured to the marker board. "Please." For the next 20 minutes, Ethan sketched and explained, his hands moving with a confidence he hadn't felt in years. The math flowed easily, the concepts clicking into place like pieces of a puzzle he'd been solving subconsciously for a decade. He forgot about the corporate setting, forgot about his former status as maintenance staff, forgot about everything except the pure satisfaction of working on a problem that mattered. When he finally stepped back, the board was covered in calculations and diagrams. "That's brilliant," Lena said quietly. "Genuinely brilliant. With the right sensors and predictive algorithms, this could push us past 12%, maybe past 15%. "Daddy draws really fast," Sophie observed from where she'd been quietly coloring at the conference table. Ethan turned to his daughter, suddenly remembering she'd been watching this entire exchange. "Sorry, Soph, that was probably boring." "It wasn't boring, you looked happy." Sophie tilted her head. "You should do this job, you're good at it." Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds, Ethan met Lena's eyes, saw hope and understanding there. "Let me show you something else," Lena said. She led them down another corridor to a different kind of space, part workshop, part creative studio, with flexible furniture and whiteboards on every wall. "This is our innovation lab, completely independent from the main production teams. People work here on whatever projects interest them, whatever problems they want to solve. No corporate oversight, no pressure to deliver immediate results, just pure research and development." "That must be expensive," Ethan said. "It is, but the breakthroughs that come out of this space more than pay for themselves." Lena paused. "If you came to work here, this would be your home base, your own lab space, your own budget, your own timeline. You'd consult with the main teams when you wanted to, but you'd have complete autonomy over your work." Ethan walked through the space slowly. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, natural light everywhere, spaces designed for collaboration but also for quiet focus. It was perfect. It was everything he'd dreamed of having back when he was a young engineer convinced he'd change the world. "What about hours?" he asked. "Expectations, deliverables?" "You tell me what works for you." Lena leaned against one of the workbenches. "If you need to leave every day at 2:30 to pick up Sophie, you leave at 2:30. If you work better from home some days, work from home. If you need to take a week off because Sophie has school vacation, take it. I'm not interested in burning out the best engineer I'm likely to find. I'm interested in creating an environment where brilliance can actually flourish." It sounded too good to be true. Ethan had learned to be suspicious of things that sounded too good to be true. "Why?" he asked. Why go to all this trouble for someone who was mopping your floors a month ago? Lena was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Because I've realized that the most valuable people are often the ones my industry overlooks. The ones we make invisible because they don't fit our narrow definition of talent. You have a decade of engineering expertise and another decade of life experience that taught you what actually matters. That combination is irreplaceable. She paused. And because you gave me $20 when you had nothing, character like that doesn't come around often. I'd be an idiot not to do everything in my power to keep you. Can I see the children's place? Sophie asked, breaking the tension. The one with cookies? Lena smiled. Absolutely. Follow me. The child care center occupied a sunny corner of the building, with play areas and reading nooks and walls painted in cheerful colors. Children of various ages played under the supervision of qualified staff. It was clean, safe, professionally run, everything working parents dreamed of and could rarely afford. Employees get subsidized childcare, so Lena explained as Sophie's eyes widened at the toys. Before and after school care, plus full day during summer and holidays. There's homework help and art classes and even tutoring if needed. This is awesome, Sophie breathed. She turned to Ethan. If you work here, can I come here? We'd be happy to have you, Lena said, before Ethan could answer. I've been told our snack game is top-notch. One of the childcare workers approached with a warm smile. Would you like to look around, sweetheart? We're about to start an art project if you'd like to join. Sophie looked to Ethan for permission. He nodded and she ran off eagerly, already absorbed in this new adventure. Ethan watched her go, his chest tight with emotion. She's been through a lot, he said quietly. You both have. Lena gestured back toward the hallway. Walk with me? They left the child care center and moved to a quieter corridor, away from the bustle of the main floor. Through windows, Ethan could see the city sprawling below, the same city where he'd walked hungry and desperate just days ago. I need to be honest with you, Lena said. This isn't just about correcting a wrong, though that's part of it. And it's not just about acquiring your brilliant designs, though I definitely want those. It's about changing the culture here. For years, Hartwell Industries has operated on the assumption that talent looks a certain way. Ivy League degrees, uninterrupted career trajectories, people who fit a specific mold. We've missed incredible people because they didn't check the right boxes. People like me, Ethan said. People like you. Single parents, career changers, people who've experienced setbacks and came back stronger. I want to build a company that sees value in those experiences, not despite them, but because of them. Lena met his eyes. You'd be the first hire in that initiative. If it works, if you thrive here, it opens doors for others who've been overlooked. That's bigger than any engineering project. The weight of what she was proposing settled over Ethan. Not just a job, not just redemption, but a chance to prove that people like him, people who'd stumbled, who'd sacrificed, who'd become invisible, had value that traditional metrics couldn't measure. That's a lot of pressure, he admitted. It is, and if it's too much, if you'd rather just focus on the engineering without the symbolic weight, I understand. The offer stands either way. Ethan thought about the last 10 years. The grief, the struggle, the slow erosion of his identity into something smaller and quieter. He thought about Sophie, watching him come alive in that conference room, telling him he looked happy. He thought about the librarian's daughter who'd turned a decade of parenting into proof of competence rather than absence. I want to see the security footage, he said abruptly. The real footage. The unedited version that shows I didn't steal anything. Lena looked surprised, but nodded. Of course. Follow me. They took the elevator to the security office on the 3rd floor. The room was smaller than Ethan expected, filled with monitors and recording equipment. A young woman sat at the main console, and she stood quickly when she saw Lena. Ms. Hartwell, how can I help you? Pull up the footage from October 17th, evening shift, research wing. The security officer's fingers flew across the keyboard. Multiple screens lit up with different camera angles. Here's the edited version that was filed with HR, she said, and Ethan watched himself on screen, leaving the building at 8:47 p.m., carrying what could have been a small electronic device. Now, the original, Lena said quietly. The security officer clicked something, and the footage changed subtly. The timestamp now read 8:17 p.m. The object in Ethan's hand was clearly his lunch bag, not a drive. He was humming to himself, completely relaxed, unaware that this moment would be weaponized against him. 30 minutes, Ethan said, his voice rough. He altered it by 30 minutes. Marcus was very good at his job, Lena said. Unfortunately, he used those skills to frame innocent people rather than protect the company. The police have the evidence now. He'll face charges for fraud, theft, and falsifying evidence. Ethan watched the real footage play out, himself finishing his shift, completely innocent, just a man heading home to his daughter. The casual cruelty of what had been done to him hit with fresh force. "I want copies of both versions," he said. "The edited one and the real one. I want documentation of everything that was done to me." "You'll have it all," Lena promised. "Every piece of evidence, every email, every falsified report. You deserve to know exactly what happened." "Thank you." They returned to the elevator in silence. As the doors closed, Lena spoke again. "You don't have to decide today. Take whatever time you need. Talk to Sophie. Think about what you really want. The offer will be here when you're ready." "I want to start next Monday," Ethan heard himself say. Lena turned to him, surprise evident on her face. "Are you sure?" "No," Ethan admitted, "but I'm sure that I'm tired of playing it safe. I'm sure that Sophie deserves a father who's not just surviving, but actually living. And I'm sure that if I don't take this chance, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." A smile spread across Lena's face. Genuine, warm, relieved. "Monday it is then. I'll have HR prepare your contract. We'll discuss salary, benefits, all the details. But Ethan," she paused, "welcome back. To engineering, to yourself, to whatever comes next." They collected Sophie from the childcare center, where she'd apparently made 3 new friends and created a masterpiece out of construction paper and glitter. She chattered excitedly about the art supplies and the nice teachers and the really good cookies all the way home on the bus. That evening, after dinner, another real meal, Ethan still marveling at the simple luxury of a full refrigerator, Sophie sat at the table doing homework while Ethan washed dishes. The domestic routine felt different now, weighted with possibility rather than desperation. "Daddy?" Sophie looked up from her math worksheet. "Are you going to take that job?" "I am, starting Monday. What do you think about that?" Sophie was quiet for a moment, her pencil tapping against her paper. "I think Mommy would be proud of you." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He set down the dish he was washing and turned to face his daughter. "Why do you say that?" "Because you stopped doing the thing you were good at to take care of her. And then to take care of me." "That was really nice of you." Sophie's eyes were serious, older than 8. "But I don't want you to be sad anymore. I want you to do the thing that makes you happy. Mommy would want that too." Ethan crossed to the table and pulled Sophie into a hug, his throat too tight to speak. How had he raised someone so wise, so compassionate, so completely certain about what mattered? "I love you, Soph," he managed finally. "Love you more," she whispered back. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan sat on his futon with his old laptop, retrieved from a box he'd been too sentimental to donate even in their worst days. He opened files he hadn't touched in years, designs and calculations and half-finished projects from the person he used to be. But as he worked, he realized something fundamental had shifted. The work wasn't about proving himself anymore, wasn't about achievement for its own sake. It was about creating something useful, something that might make the world incrementally better, something Sophie could be proud of when she was old enough to understand. The engineer he'd been and the father he'd become weren't separate identities anymore. They were the same person, finally whole, finally ready to move forward without apologizing for the path that had brought him here. Ethan worked until midnight, his mind sharp and focused in ways it hadn't been in a decade. When he finally closed his laptop and lay back on the futon, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: excitement for tomorrow, anticipation for what came next. Hope that wasn't attached to desperation, but to genuine possibility. Across the city, Marcus Chen was probably being processed through the criminal justice system, his career destroyed by the same kind of casual cruelty he'd inflicted on others. Ethan tried to feel satisfaction about that, and found he mostly felt nothing. Revenge wasn't sweet, it was just necessary. What mattered was this: his daughter sleeping safely in the next room, food in their refrigerator, money in their account, and a future that looked nothing like the desperate scramble of the past 3 weeks. What mattered was the chance to be both the father Sophie needed and the engineer he'd once been, without having to sacrifice one for the other. In 4 days, Ethan would walk into Hartwell Industries not as maintenance staff, but as a lead engineer. He'd have his own lab space, his own projects, his own autonomy. He'd prove that brilliance could coexist with single parenthood, that career gaps weren't fatal, that the most valuable employees were sometimes the ones who'd learned what actually mattered the hard way. But tonight, he was just a father on a futon, listening to his daughter breathe in the next room, grateful beyond measure for second chances and the simple luxury of hope. Tomorrow he'd start planning. Tomorrow he'd prepare. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to be this new version of himself. For tonight, survival was enough. Safety was enough. The knowledge that they'd made it through the worst was more than enough. Ethan closed his eyes and, for the first time in longer than he could remember, slept without nightmares, without fear, without the weight of impossible choices pressing down on his chest. He slept like a man who'd finally found his way home. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything feel possible. Ethan stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie he'd bought over the weekend, his first new clothing purchase in over a year. The face staring back at him looked different somehow, not younger, but less defeated. The shadows under his eyes had faded. His shoulders sat straighter. "Daddy, you look fancy!" Sophie appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school in her favorite purple shirt. "Too fancy?" Ethan tugged at the tie, suddenly uncertain. "No, you look like a boss." Sophie grinned. "A boss who's also my dad." They ate breakfast together, pancakes, because it was a special day and they could afford the celebration. Sophie chattered nervously about her own day ahead, a presentation on her invention project, while Ethan tried to calm the butterflies staging a revolution in his stomach. "Are you scared?" Sophie asked suddenly, her fork pausing mid-bite. "A little bit," Ethan admitted. "It's been a long time since I did this kind of work." "But you were good at it before, right?" "I was." "Then you'll be good at it now." Sophie said it with such simple certainty that Ethan almost believed her. "You just forgot for a while, but your brain remembers." Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds, Ethan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just notice now because you're not so worried all the time." The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. How much had Sophie absorbed during those weeks of desperation? How much had she understood while pretending not to notice? They walked to school together, Sophie swinging their joined hands and practicing her presentation under her breath. At the gates, she hugged him extra tight. "Good luck, Daddy. You're going to be amazing." "You too, Soph. Knock 'em dead with that invention." He watched her disappear into the building, then turned toward downtown with his heart hammering against his ribs. The bus ride felt simultaneously too long and too short. Other commuters sat absorbed in their phones or staring into middle distance, unaware that the man in the slightly too new tie was walking into a life he'd thought was lost forever. Hartwell Industries looked different on a Monday morning. More alive, more purposeful, flooded with employees streaming through the entrance with their coffee and their briefcases and their casual confidence. Ethan joined the flow, riding the elevator to the 5th floor with a group of engineers discussing wind patterns and algorithm optimization. They didn't look at him twice. He was just another professional, another member of the team. The invisibility that had once felt like erasure now felt like a clean slate. The innovation lab was empty when Ethan arrived, exactly as Lena had promised. His lab space, his domain. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the morning sun cast long rectangles across the polished floor. Everything was pristine, waiting, full of potential. "You made it." Lena appeared in the doorway, balancing 2 coffee cups. She extended one toward him. "Thought you might need this. First days are always nerve-wracking, even for brilliant engineers." "Especially for engineers who've spent the last decade mopping floors," Ethan said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "No," Lena's voice was firm. "Especially for engineers who've spent the last decade learning what matters and coming back stronger for it. Don't diminish what you've survived, Ethan. It makes you more valuable, not less. She gestured for him to follow her to one of the workstations. A sleek laptop sat waiting, along with login credentials and a welcome packet. Your contract is in here, along with benefits information and building access details. Take your time reviewing everything. HR will need your signature by end of day, but there's no rush this morning. Ethan flipped through the packet, his eyes catching on the salary figure. It was more than double what he'd made in maintenance, more than he'd earned as a junior engineer before Sarah got sick, enough to build a life rather than just survive one. "This is generous," he said quietly. "It's market rate for your expertise. Actually, it's probably under market rate, but I figured we'd start here and adjust as you prove yourself." Lena smiled slightly. "Though between you and me, I expect we'll be renegotiating upward within 6 months." "That confident in me?" "That confident in what I saw last week when you solved a 6-month problem in 20 minutes. Lena pulled up a chair, her expression shifting to something more serious. "I need to tell you something before you officially start. Marcus Chen's arrest made the news this weekend. Local business section, small article, but it's out there. Some of your former colleagues might recognize your name in connection with the case. There could be questions." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "About what happened, about the investigation. Some people might be curious, others might be skeptical. Corporate gossip travels fast." She paused. "How you handle it is completely up to you. You can tell people as much or as little as you want, but I wanted you to be prepared." The coffee suddenly felt heavy in Ethan's hand. He'd been so focused on the technical challenges ahead that he hadn't considered the social dynamics, the whispered conversations, the weight of being the guy who'd been falsely accused and then vindicated. "I don't want it to define me," he said finally. "I don't want to be the wrongly terminated janitor who got his job back. I want to be an engineer who does good work." "Then that's who you'll be." Lena stood, gathering her own coffee. "I'll leave you to get settled. Team meeting at 10 if you'd like to join, but it's optional for today. Feel free to explore, get comfortable, figure out your space. This is your domain now." After she left, Ethan sat in the empty lab for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. His domain, his space, his chance to rebuild not just a career but an identity that had been fractured for so long. He opened the laptop and began the tedious process of setting up accounts, reading through documentation, familiarizing himself with Hartwell's systems. But his mind kept drifting to the designs he'd sketched last week, the optimization problems he'd identified, the solutions beginning to crystallize in his thoughts. Around 9:30, voices drifted from the hallway. Ethan looked up to see a group of engineers passing by, their conversation animated and technical. One of them, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes, noticed him and paused. "You're new," she said, not unkindly. "First day? That obvious?" Ethan stood, extending his hand. "Ethan Brooks." "Sarah Chen." She shook his hand firmly, then her eyes widened slightly. "Wait. Brooks. You're the engineer Lena hired? The one from the Marcus Chen case?" And there it was, 30 minutes into his first day, and already the past was catching up. "That's me," Ethan said evenly. Sarah studied him with undisguised curiosity. "Marcus is my ex-husband. Has been for 3 years, thank God. When I saw his arrest in the news, I can't say I was surprised. The man was always looking for shortcuts." She paused. "I'm sorry for what he did to you. That was unconscionable." The apology caught Ethan off guard. "You don't need to apologize for him." "Maybe not. But I worked with him long enough to know how he operated. He was good at making people invisible when it suited him." Sarah's expression softened. "Lena says you're brilliant, that you saw solutions to problems we've been banging our heads against for months. I'm looking forward to working with you. You're on the renewable energy team? Lead mechanical engineer, which means you and I will probably be collaborating quite a bit." Sarah smiled. "Fair warning, I'm demanding as hell and I don't suffer fools, but I respect people who know their stuff. Prove you know yours and we'll get along fine." After she left, Ethan returned to his workstation with a strange mixture of anxiety and relief. One conversation down, however many more to go. But Sarah hadn't treated him like a victim or a curiosity. She'd treated him like a colleague, which was all he wanted. The morning passed in a blur of system orientation and documentation review. At 10, Ethan decided to attend the team meeting, partly out of curiosity and partly because hiding felt like cowardice. The conference room was already half full when he arrived, engineers clustering around the table with their coffee and notebooks. Conversations died down when he entered. Ethan felt a dozen pairs of eyes assess him, curious and speculative. He took a seat near the back, trying to project a confidence he didn't quite feel. Lena arrived moments later with Sarah and another engineer, a younger man with enthusiastic energy and a tablet clutched under his arm. "Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. Before we dive into project updates, I want to introduce our newest team member. This is Ethan Brooks. He'll be working in the Innovation Lab on advanced optimization systems. Ethan brings extensive experience in renewable energy engineering and some fresh perspectives we desperately need." The introduction was smooth, professional, completely omitting the circumstances of his hiring. Ethan appreciated the discretion even as he felt the unspoken questions hovering in the room. "Welcome aboard," the young engineer said, extending his hand across the table. "I'm David Park. Electrical engineering. If you need any help navigating the systems or want to grab lunch, let me know." Others introduced themselves in turn, names and specialties that Ethan tried to commit to memory. Some were warm, others more reserved, but no one was overtly hostile. He could work with that. The meeting itself was fascinating. Problems Ethan could solve, challenges he could address, discussions that made his engineering brain light up with possibility. He stayed mostly quiet, observing dynamics and absorbing information, but toward the end he couldn't help himself. "Can I ask a question about the blade resonance issue?" Ethan spoke up during a discussion about vibration problems in high wind conditions. The engineer presenting, an older man named Tom, looked surprised but nodded. "Sure. What's your question?" "You're using passive damping systems, right? Have you considered active dampening with predictive algorithms? If you could anticipate wind pattern changes, you could adjust dampening response before resonance becomes an issue." The room went quiet. Tom leaned forward, his expression shifting from surprise to interest. "We looked at active systems 2 years ago, but couldn't get the sensor accuracy we needed. The lag time made it ineffective." "What if the sensors weren't on the turbine itself?" Ethan found himself standing, moving to the whiteboard. "What if you used atmospheric sensors positioned upwind? You'd get advance warning of wind pattern changes, maybe 30 seconds to a minute. Enough time to adjust dampening systems proactively." He sketched quickly, his marker flying across the board. The concept was rough, but the principle was sound. Around the table, engineers leaned forward, following his logic. "That could work," Sarah said slowly. "The sensor array would be expensive, but if it prevented catastrophic resonance damage, the ROI would justify itself within 2 years," another engineer finished. "Maybe less." Tom was studying the board with an expression Ethan recognized, the look of someone seeing a solution to a problem they'd been wrestling with for months. "Can you develop this further? Run the calculations, model the sensor placement, figure out the algorithm requirements?" Ethan glanced at Lena, who was watching him with barely concealed satisfaction. She nodded slightly. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I can do that." The meeting ended shortly after, but several engineers lingered to ask Ethan questions about his sensor concept. David Park was particularly enthusiastic, already brainstorming electrical requirements and power systems. Sarah pulled Ethan aside as the room cleared. "That was good work," she said bluntly. "You see connections other people miss. That's valuable." She paused. "But a word of advice? Some people are going to resent how quickly you've come in and started contributing, especially given the circumstances of your hiring. Don't let it rattle you. Do the work, prove yourself, let the results speak." "Is that what you did?" Ethan asked. Sarah laughed, a sharp sound. "I had to prove myself twice as hard because I'm a woman in a male-dominated field. You're proving yourself after being wrongly fired. Different challenges, same principle. Keep your head down, do brilliant work, and eventually the noise fades." She left him with that advice, and Ethan returned to his lab feeling energized despite the warning. He spent the afternoon developing his sensor concept, losing himself in calculations and models. This was what he'd been missing: the pure intellectual satisfaction of solving complex problems, of seeing patterns and connections, of creating something that could actually work. Hours passed without notice. When his phone alarm went off at 2:15, his reminder to leave for Sophie's school pickup, Ethan was startled to find the afternoon nearly gone. He saved his work, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the elevator. The building was quieter in the mid-afternoon, most people absorbed in their work. Ethan felt a small thrill of satisfaction as he left. He was working, really working, contributing, mattering. Sophie was waiting at the school gates when he arrived, practically bouncing with excitement. "Daddy, my presentation was so good! Mrs. Peterson said I had the most creative invention, and Billy Martinez asked if I could really build it, and I said, maybe someday when I'm an engineer like you." Ethan swept her into a hug, her enthusiasm infectious. "That's amazing, Soph. Tell me everything." They walked home with Sophie recounting every detail of her day, the questions her classmates had asked, the way Mrs. Peterson had praised her drawing, the moment she'd realized she loved presenting in front of people. Ethan listened and encouraged and marveled at his daughter's confidence, so different from the careful quietness of recent weeks. At home, they settled into their new routine. Sophie did homework at the kitchen table while Ethan prepared dinner, real dinner, with vegetables and protein, and the kind of balanced nutrition he dreamed about during the cracker days. As he cooked, his mind drifted back to the sensor array concept, already identifying improvements and refinements. "Daddy?" Sophie looked up from her math worksheet. "You're humming." "Am I?" "Yeah. You used to hum when I was little, before Mommy got sick. But you stopped for a long time." Sophie's expression was serious. "I'm glad you're humming again." The observation hit Ethan with unexpected force. How many small joys had grief stolen? How many pieces of himself had he lost without noticing? "Me too, Soph," he said quietly. "Me too." That evening, after Sophie was in bed, Ethan opened his laptop and continued working on the sensor array design. But this time he wasn't just solving a problem. He was building something he could show to the team, something concrete and useful. Around midnight, he had a working model and preliminary calculations showing potential efficiency improvements of 18%. 18%. More than anyone had projected. More than the team had achieved in 2 years of effort. Ethan sat back, staring at his screen, and allowed himself a moment of pure satisfaction. This was why he'd become an engineer. Not for recognition or prestige, but for this, the moment when abstract concepts became concrete solutions, when hard work yielded tangible results. The rest of the week unfolded in a pattern that felt both foreign and deeply right. Mornings with Sophie, full days at Hartwell Industries, evenings of dinner and homework and bedtime stories, nights of continued work on projects he couldn't quite put down. Ethan presented his sensor array design to the team on Wednesday, and the response was even better than he'd hoped. "This is exactly what we need," Tom said, studying the models with obvious respect. "I'll admit, I was skeptical about the upwind sensor approach, but you've worked out the positioning algorithms brilliantly. The advance warning window is better than I thought possible." "How quickly can we prototype this?" Sarah asked, already making notes. 2 months if we prioritize it, David offered. Maybe less if we can source the sensors quickly. Lena had attended the presentation, sitting quietly in the back. As the team discussed implementation, she caught Ethan's eye and nodded slightly, pride and validation in a single gesture. But not everything was smooth. On Thursday, Ethan overheard a conversation in the break room. 2 engineers he vaguely recognized, their voices pitched low, but not low enough. "It's nepotism," one was saying. "Lena feels guilty about the wrongful termination, so she gives him a position he's not qualified for." "Did you see his sensor design?" the other interrupted. "That's not the work of someone unqualified. Anyone can get lucky with one good idea. Doesn't mean he deserves to be here." Ethan stood frozen outside the break room door, coffee cup in hand. He should walk away, should ignore it, should remember Sarah's advice about letting the work speak, but the words stung anyway. Unqualified, lucky, didn't deserve to be here. He forced himself to walk past the break room without entering, returning to his lab with the coffee untouched. For the rest of the afternoon, the overheard conversation echoed in his mind, undermining his confidence, making him second-guess every decision. That evening, Sophie noticed his distraction immediately. "Bad day?" she asked over dinner. Not bad, just challenging. Sophie studied him with those two perceptive eyes. Did someone say something mean? How did you know? Because you have the same face I have when kids at school say mean things. Sophie pushed rice around her plate. Mrs. Peterson says people are mean when they're jealous. Maybe the people at your work are jealous because you're good at your job. Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds, again. Maybe, Ethan conceded, but it still doesn't feel good to hear. No, but it also doesn't make it true. Sophie looked up at him seriously. You know you're good at your job, right? Like, actually know it? Did he? Ethan considered the question honestly. A week ago, he'd been rationing crackers and questioning everything about himself. Now he was designing systems that could revolutionize wind turbine efficiency. The whiplash was dizzying. I'm learning to know it again, he said finally. Good, because I know it, and Ms. Hartwell knows it, and the nice engineers know it, so who cares about the mean ones? That weekend, Ethan took Sophie to the park, their first real recreational outing in months. They packed a proper picnic with sandwiches and fruit and cookies and spent the afternoon on swings and slides, and the kind of simple play that felt like a luxury after so much survival. Daddy, push me higher, Sophie called from the swing, her laughter carrying across the playground. Ethan pushed, watching his daughter arc against the sky, and felt something shift in his chest. This was what mattered, not the skeptical engineers or the whispered doubts or the pressure to prove himself. Just this, his daughter's joy, their stability, the knowledge that they'd survived the worst and come out intact. On Monday of his second week, Ethan arrived at work to find an email from Lena requesting a meeting. His stomach clenched reflexively. Had something gone wrong? Had someone complained? But when he entered her office, she was smiling. Sit down, Ethan. I wanted to give you some news before the official announcement goes out. Lena gestured to the chair across from her desk. The board reviewed your sensor array proposal this weekend. They're approving full funding for prototype development and field testing. We're talking substantial investment, $500,000 in initial funding. Ethan's breath caught. That's incredible. It's deserved. Your design solves multiple problems simultaneously, and the projected efficiency improvements are better than anything we've achieved in 5 years. Lena leaned forward. But there's more. The board wants you to lead the project, full authority over design, implementation, and testing. You'd have a team of 4 engineers reporting directly to you. Lead the project, a team reporting to him. 2 weeks ago, he'd been cleaning toilets and rationing food. The cognitive dissonance was almost overwhelming. That's a lot of responsibility, Ethan said carefully. It is. And if you'd rather just consult while someone else manages the logistics, I understand. But Ethan, you've earned this. Not because of what was done to you, not because I feel guilty, but because you're doing exceptional work. The kind of work that deserves recognition and responsibility. Ethan thought about the engineers in the break room, their skepticism and resentment. Leading a project would make him even more visible, even more vulnerable to criticism. But it would also give him the authority to see his vision through, to prove to himself and everyone else that he belonged here. I'll do it, he said. I want to do it. Good. Lena pulled out a folder. Here are the preliminary team assignments and project timeline. We're aiming for initial testing in 3 months, full deployment in 6. It's aggressive, but the board believes in the potential. As Ethan left her office, folder in hand, he felt the weight of what he'd just accepted. Leadership, authority, the chance to shape not just a project, but the trajectory of his career. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Sarah found him in the hallway, her expression knowing. I heard. Congratulations. Thank you, I think. She laughed. It's natural to be nervous, but you're ready for this, Ethan. Trust yourself. I'm trying. Try harder. Sarah's voice was firm, but not unkind. Imposter syndrome will destroy you if you let it. You've done the work. You've earned your place here. Now own it. That evening, Ethan told Sophie about the promotion over dinner. She listened seriously, processing the information with her characteristic thoughtfulness. Does this mean you'll work more hours? She asked, worried. No. It means I'll have more responsibility, But I can still pick you up from school every day. That doesn't change. Promise? Promise, Soph. You come first. Always. Sophie relaxed slightly. Then I think it's really cool. My dad, the boss of a project. Your dad, the slightly terrified boss of a project, Ethan corrected. You'll be great. Sophie said it with such simple confidence that Ethan almost believed her. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan assembled his team, David Park for electrical systems, a quiet woman named Jennifer Liu for sensor programming, and 2 mechanical engineers Tom recommended. They worked with an intensity that surprised even Ethan, the project taking shape faster than projected timelines. There were challenges, of course, budget concerns that required creative solutions, technical obstacles that demanded long hours of problem solving, personality conflicts that needed diplomatic navigation. But slowly, methodically, the sensor array system moved from concept to reality. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon in mid-December. They'd been testing sensor accuracy in simulated wind conditions, struggling to achieve the precision needed for the system to work effectively. Ethan had been staring at data streams for hours, trying to identify the source of the measurement drift. What if we're calibrating wrong? Jennifer said suddenly, looking up from her laptop. What if we're trying to measure absolute wind speed when we should be measuring rate of change? Ethan's mind raced, following her logic. That would reduce noise in the data significantly. We'd need to adjust the algorithm, but it would work, David finished, already pulling up code. Give me 30 minutes. 27 minutes later, they ran the test again. The sensor accuracy jumped from 73% to 96%. The room erupted in cheers, high fives exchanged, the kind of pure joy that came from solving a problem everyone thought might be insurmountable. Ethan felt tears prick his eyes and didn't bother hiding them. This was why he'd become an engineer, not for the salary or the recognition, but for moments like this, when a team came together and made something impossible become real. We did it, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You all did brilliant work. We all did, Jennifer corrected, smiling. Team effort, boss. That night, Ethan came home to find Sophie already asleep, worn out from a field trip. He sat on the edge of her bed, watching her breathe, overcome with gratitude for everything that had brought them to this moment. The hunger, the desperation, the $20 decision that had seemed so stupid at the time. All of it had led here, to stability, to purpose, to a life that felt worth living again. We're going to be okay, Soph, Ethan whispered. We're really going to be okay. And for the first time in years, he believed it completely. December brought the kind of cold that made the city feel clean and new, frost-etching patterns on windows and breath visible in crystalline clouds. Ethan stood at his lab window on a Monday morning, coffee warming his hands, watching the sun rise over buildings that no longer felt indifferent. Somewhere down there was the coffee shop where everything had changed. Somewhere was the apartment building where they'd nearly been evicted. Somewhere was the version of himself who'd given away his last $20 without knowing it would save him. 3 months. That's how long it had been since that morning. 90 days that felt like a lifetime. Deep thoughts? Sarah appeared beside him, her own coffee steaming in the cold air that seeped through the window. Just remembering where I was 3 months ago. And appreciating how far you've come? Sarah's tone was knowing. That's healthy, as long as you don't get stuck there. I'm not stuck, just grateful. Good. Sarah gestured toward the lab. Because we have field testing today. Real turbines, real conditions. Time to see if your brilliant design actually works outside controlled environments. The field testing site was 2 hours north, a wind farm stretching across rolling hills like a forest of white giants. Ethan had made the drive with his team at dawn, everyone unusually quiet, the weight of months of work pressing down on them. This was the moment of truth. Either the sensor array system worked as designed, or they'd spent $500,000 on an elegant failure. Tom met them at the site manager's office, his expression cautiously optimistic. Conditions are perfect. Sustained winds with predictable gusts. Exactly what we need to test the predictive algorithms. They spent the morning installing the upwind sensor array, positioning each unit according to Ethan's calculations. David ran cable while Jennifer programmed the central processing unit. Ethan supervised, double-checking connections, verifying placements, trying to calm the nervous energy thrumming through his veins. By noon, everything was ready. The team gathered in the monitoring station, screens displaying real-time data from both the new sensor array and the turbine's existing systems. Ethan took a deep breath and nodded to Jennifer. Initialize the system. Data began flowing across the screens: wind speed, direction, turbulence patterns. The upwind sensors detected changes 30 to 45 seconds before they reached the turbine. The algorithms processed the information, predicted the impact, and sent adjustment signals to the dampening systems. For 10 minutes, nothing dramatic happened. The turbine operated normally, the new system humming quietly in the background. Then the wind shifted, a sudden gust that would typically cause resonance vibrations in the blade assembly. But the dampening system adjusted 3 seconds before the gust arrived. The turbine absorbed the wind change smoothly, efficiency remaining steady. No vibration spike, no power loss, just seamless operation. It worked, David breathed. It actually worked. They tested for 6 hours, throwing every wind condition they could at the system. Variable gusts, sustained high winds, rapid directional changes. Every time the predictive system adjusted proactively, maintaining optimal performance. By late afternoon, the data was irrefutable. The sensor array system increased efficiency by 19.3%. Better than projected. Better than anyone had dared hope. Ethan stood outside the monitoring station as the sun began to set, watching the turbines turn against the amber sky. His team was inside celebrating, calling Lena with the results, already planning the next phase. But he needed this moment alone. Needed to feel the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. You should be in there with them. Sarah emerged from the station, wrapping her coat tighter against the wind. This is your victory, Ethan. It's all of ours. True. But it started with you. Your design, your vision, your refusal to accept that the problem was unsolvable. Sarah studied him carefully. You know what this means, right? This isn't just a successful project. This is industry-changing innovation. Patents, publications, probably awards. Your name is going to be attached to something significant. The words should have filled him with pride. Instead, Ethan felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and discomfort. I just wanted to solve the problem. I know, that's what makes you a real engineer instead of just someone chasing recognition. Sarah smiled slightly. But recognition is coming whether you want it or not. Better prepare yourself. Recognition arrived faster than Ethan expected. Within a week, industry publications were requesting interviews about the sensor array system. Within 2 weeks, competitors were calling Lena about licensing opportunities. Within 3 weeks, Hartwell Industries' stock had jumped 4% on news of the breakthrough. And through it all, Ethan maintained his routine. Up with Sophie, breakfast together, drop off at school, full day at work, pick up at 3, dinner and homework, and bedtime stories. The stability mattered more than any accolade, the normalcy more precious than any recognition. But the attention was unavoidable. In mid-January, a reporter from a major tech publication contacted Ethan directly, requesting an interview about his journey from maintenance worker to lead engineer. The email sat in his inbox for 2 days before he finally responded, agreeing to meet at a neutral location. The coffee shop on Moreau Street seemed like the only appropriate choice. Ethan arrived early, ordered his coffee, he could afford the $7 latte now without guilt, and sat at the same table where Lena had offered him a second chance 4 months ago. The barista recognized him and waved, and Ethan marveled at how the ordinary gesture felt extraordinary. He was known here, remembered, visible. The reporter was a woman in her 30s named Maria Chen, sharp-eyed and direct. She settled across from him with a recorder and notepad, diving straight into questions without preamble. "Tell me about the morning you paid for Lena Hartwell's coffee," she began. "What made you do it?" Ethan had expected the question but still struggled with the answer. "I don't know, she needed help. I had $20, it seemed obvious." "Even though it was your last $20? Even though you had a child to feed?" "I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I just saw someone in a difficult moment and reacted." Maria made notes, her expression thoughtful. "And you had no idea she was the CEO of the company that had fired you?" "None. I recognized her vaguely, but I didn't make the connection until later." Ethan paused. "If I'd known, I probably wouldn't have helped, which says something unflattering about me. Or something honest about human nature. Maria leaned forward. Here's what interests me about your story, Mr. Brooks. It's not just a feel-good narrative about kindness being rewarded. It's about systemic invisibility. You were working at Hartwell Industries for over a year. Brilliant engineer with an MIT degree, reduced to maintenance work because of circumstances beyond your control. And no one noticed. No one saw your potential until you were forced into visibility by an act of kindness. What does that say about how we value people? The question cut deeper than Ethan expected. He thought about his year in maintenance, the way executives had walked past him as if he were furniture, the casual dismissal of his humanity simply because his uniform said janitor instead of engineer. It says we're very good at not seeing people we've decided don't matter, Ethan said quietly, and very bad at recognizing that circumstances don't define capability. I was the same person mopping floors as I am now leading projects. The only difference is which version of me people chose to notice. Maria's pen flew across her notepad. Lena Hartwell has been vocal about wanting to change hiring practices at Hartwell Industries, emphasizing non-traditional backgrounds, career gaps, people who don't fit conventional molds. Is that tokenism or genuine change? I think it's genuine, but I also think I'm the easy case. I have the MIT degree, the published papers, the credentials that fit traditional metrics once people bother to look. Ethan considered his words carefully. Real change means valuing people who don't have those credentials. Single mothers without college degrees who could be brilliant project managers given the chance. People with criminal records who've turned their lives around. Workers in their 50s who want to retrain for new careers. Those are the hard cases. I'm just the proof of concept. The interview continued for another hour, ranging from technical details about the sensor array system to broader questions about opportunity and second chances. When Maria finally turned off her recorder, she sat back with a satisfied expression. This is going to be a powerful piece. Thank you for your honesty. When does it publish? Ethan asked, suddenly nervous about his words being out in the world. Next month. I'll send you a draft for fact-checking before it goes live. Maria gathered her things, then paused. For what it's worth, I think what you did, both the $20 decision and everything after, matters. Not because it's a fairy tale, but because it's proof that the system doesn't have to work the way it does, that people are worth more than their most recent job title. After she left, Ethan sat alone in the coffee shop, nursing his now cold latte. The barista caught his eye and smiled. You come here a lot more now, she observed, wiping down a nearby table. I'm glad things worked out for you. That was really kind, what you did. I'm not sure it was kind. It might have just been stupid. Maybe it was both. The barista shrugged. But stupid kindness is better than smart cruelty, you know? That evening, Ethan told Sophie about the interview over dinner. She listened with her characteristic seriousness, processing the information carefully. Are people going to read about us? She asked, worried. Mostly about me. I didn't talk much about you except to say I have a daughter I love very much. Sophie relaxed slightly. Good. I don't want to be famous. That seems hard. It is hard, but sometimes hard things are worth doing. Like when you took the new job even though you were scared. Exactly like that. Sophie pushed rice around her plate, thinking, Daddy, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you miss Mommy less now that things are better? Her voice was small, uncertain. The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. He set down his fork and pulled Sophie's chair closer, taking her small hands in his. I don't miss her less, Soph. I miss her differently. He struggled to find words adequate to the complexity of grief. When things were really hard, missing her felt like drowning, like I couldn't breathe around how much I wish she was here to help. Now it feels more like an ache that's part of me. Still there, still real, but not suffocating anymore. Do you think she'd be proud of you? I hope so. I think so. Ethan's throat tightened. But I know she'd be proudest of you. Of how brave and kind and smart you are. Of how you got through the hard times without losing your sweetness. Sophie climbed into his lap, something she was getting almost too big for, and hugged him tight. They sat like that for a long time, Two people who'd survived the worst and were learning how to thrive, held together by love and stubbornness and the refusal to let grief define them. February brought the article's publication, and with it, a wave of attention Ethan wasn't prepared for. The piece went viral, shared thousands of times across social media, picked up by major news outlets. His inbox flooded with messages from people sharing their own stories of invisibility and second chances, of being overlooked and underestimated. One message in particular caught Ethan's attention. It was from a woman named Patricia Reeves who'd read the article and recognized him from his MIT days. "I remember you," she wrote. "You were in my thermodynamics seminar. Always the quietest person in the room, but somehow the one with the most insightful questions. I lost track of you after graduation. Reading about everything you've been through, the loss, the struggle, the perseverance, it explains so much about why you disappeared from the field. I'm teaching engineering now at State University, and I'd love to have you speak to my students about nonlinear career paths, about how the person who succeeds isn't always the one who follows the straightest line. Would you consider it?" Ethan read the message 3 times, memories of those MIT seminars flooding back. He'd been so young then, so certain his path was clear and straight. He'd had no idea what life would throw at him, how far he'd fall, how hard he'd have to fight to climb back. He wrote back agreeing to speak, and in March found himself standing in front of 80 engineering students, more nervous than he'd been for any technical presentation. "I'm going to tell you something they don't usually teach in engineering school," Ethan began, his voice steadier than he felt. "Your career is not going to be linear. It's not going to be predictable. And the most valuable lessons you learn probably won't come from textbooks or lab work." He talked about Sarah's illness, about choosing love over ambition, about the maintenance job and the invisibility that came with it, about being framed and fired and reduced to his last $20, about the choice he'd made in a coffee shop without knowing it would change everything. "The person I was at MIT thought success meant patents and publications and recognition," Ethan said. "The person I became through loss and struggle learned that success means showing up for the people you love, doing work that matters, maintaining your humanity when systems are designed to erase it." He paused, looking out at the young faces watching him so intently. "You're all going to face moments when you have to choose between the career you planned and the life that's actually happening. Choose the life. Choose the people. Choose kindness even when it costs you. Everything else can be rebuilt." The questions afterward were thoughtful and searching. How had he maintained his skills during years away from engineering? How had he found the courage to start over? What advice did he have for students facing their own setbacks? Ethan answered as honestly as he could, and when the session finally ended, students clustered around him with more questions, more stories, more need for reassurance that their own nonlinear paths might still lead somewhere meaningful. Patricia found him afterward, her expression warm. That was exactly what they needed to hear. Engineering education is so focused on technical excellence that we forget to prepare students for the human challenges they'll face. Thank you for being willing to be vulnerable with them. It felt important, Ethan admitted. I spent so long being invisible. If telling my story helps someone else feel seen, that matters. The semester progressed with a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Work challenges that pushed Ethan but didn't overwhelm him. Team dynamics that had shifted from cautious collaboration to genuine camaraderie. Sophie thriving in school, her confidence growing, her laughter more frequent. In April, Lena called Ethan into her office with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Sit down," she said. "I have a proposition for you." Ethan sat, his stomach tightening reflexively. Even months of stability couldn't erase the instinct to expect bad news. "The sensor array project has attracted significant attention," Lena began. "Multiple companies want to license the technology. But more than that, it's generated interest in our broader approach to innovation. The board wants to expand the program you represent, hiring non-traditional candidates, creating pathways for people with interrupted careers, building systems that value diverse experience." That's good, right? It's very good, but it needs leadership. Someone who understands both the technical side and the human side. Someone who's lived the experience of being overlooked and can ensure we're creating genuine opportunity rather than just good PR. Lena leaned forward. "I want you to build and lead a new division. opportunity engineering, we're tentatively calling it. Your job would be identifying talent in unexpected places, creating entry points for people the industry typically ignores, mentoring engineers from non-traditional backgrounds. You'd still do technical work, still lead projects, but your primary focus would be changing how we think about who gets to be an engineer. The scope of what she was proposing took Ethan's breath away. That's not a small job. No, it would require significant time and energy. It would also give you a platform to create systemic change rather than just being a singular success story. Lena paused. But I won't push you into it. If you'd rather focus purely on technical work, that's completely valid. I just think you have insight and empathy that could transform a lot of lives. Ethan thought about the students at State University, their hungry questions and desperate need for reassurance. He thought about all the people who'd sent him messages after the article published, sharing their own stories of invisibility and struggle. He thought about Sophie, watching him choose between safety and significance. "Can I have time to think about it?" he asked. "To talk to Sophie? This would be a bigger commitment than what I'm doing now." "Of course, take whatever time you need." That evening, Ethan explained the opportunity to Sophie over dinner, trying to present it fairly without influencing her response. "Would you still pick me up from school?" Sophie asked, her first and most important question. "Every day." "That wouldn't change. I just have more meetings, more travel sometimes, but I'd make sure you always came first." Sophie considered this carefully. "Would you be helping people like you, people who got treated unfairly?" "Yes, people who have skills but don't get chances because of how they look on paper, because of gaps in their resumes or unconventional backgrounds." "Then I think you should do it." Sophie's voice was firm. "Because it's not fair when people don't get chances. You almost didn't get a chance, and look how awesome you are at your job. Other people deserve that too." Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds. Ethan pulled his daughter into a hug, overcome with pride and love and the certainty that somewhere Sarah was watching this moment with approval. "When did you get so wise, Soph?" "I've always been wise. You just notice now because you're not so worried all the time." The next morning, Ethan accepted Lena's offer. Within weeks, he was building the framework for opportunity engineering, developing recruitment strategies, establishing partnerships with community colleges and training programs, creating mentorship structures. The work was challenging in entirely new ways, requiring skills he'd never formally developed but had learned through necessity during his years of struggle. His first hire was a woman named Janelle Martinez, a single mother in her 40s who'd spent 15 years as a manufacturing technician before putting herself through night school for an engineering degree. She had no fancy pedigree, no corporate experience, and a resume full of gaps from childcare responsibilities. She also had practical problem-solving skills and a work ethic forged by years of doing everything the hard way. "Why are you taking a chance on me?" Janelle asked during her interview, her voice caught between hope and suspicion. "I don't fit what places like this usually hire." "That's exactly why," Ethan said, "because the traditional model misses brilliant people. Because gaps in a resume might just mean someone had important things to handle. Because sometimes the best engineers are the ones who've had to solve real-world problems with limited resources." He paused. "And because someone took a chance on me when I was in a similar position. I'm paying that forward." Janelle's eyes filled with tears. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't. Now let's figure out which projects would be a good fit for your skills." By summer, Opportunity Engineering had hired 12 people, veterans transitioning from military service, formerly incarcerated individuals who'd learned technical skills in prison programs, immigrants with engineering degrees from their home countries that weren't recognized in the U.S. Each brought unique perspectives and skills, and each transformed what Hartwell Industries understood about talent. The initiative wasn't without challenges. Some traditional engineers resented the new hires, questioned their qualifications, made their skepticism obvious. Ethan found himself fighting battles similar to the ones he'd faced months earlier, defending people's right to prove themselves, insisting that opportunity should be about potential rather than pedigree. But slowly, the results spoke for themselves. The Opportunity Engineering hires solved problems, contributed innovations, brought perspectives that homogeneous teams had missed. Within 6 months, the division had generated 3 patent applications and improved efficiency across multiple projects. In August, Ethan received a letter from Marcus Chen's attorney. His former nemesis was requesting a meeting from prison, where he was serving a 3-year sentence for fraud and theft. The letter was carefully worded, making no promises about apologies or explanations, just a simple request for Ethan's time. Ethan sat with the letter for a week before deciding. Sophie noticed his distraction at dinner one evening. "What's bothering you, Daddy?" "Remember I told you about the man who got me fired? The one who lied about me?" Sophie nodded, her expression serious. "He wants to talk to me. From prison. And I'm trying to decide if I should go." "Do you want to?" "Did he?" Ethan examined his feelings carefully. Anger had faded to indifference. The desire for revenge had dissolved into something more complicated. What remained was curiosity, maybe, and a strange kind of pity for someone who destroyed his own life through greed and dishonesty. "I think I do," Ethan said finally. "Not because I forgive him or think we'll be friends, but because I want to understand why. Why he chose me. Why he thought destroying someone else's life was acceptable." "Then you should go," Sophie said simply. "But you don't have to be nice about it." The prison was 2 hours north, a sprawling complex of concrete and razor wire. Ethan went alone, on a Saturday when Sophie was at a friend's house, driving through countryside that felt increasingly bleak as he approached. Marcus Chen looked older than Ethan remembered, his face drawn and his expensive confidence eroded by months of incarceration. They sat across from each other in a visiting room, separated by a table and an ocean of choices that had brought them to this moment. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said. His voice was quieter than Ethan remembered, stripped of its former authority. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Ethan admitted. "What did you want to say?" "That I'm sorry, for all of it, for framing you, for destroying your reputation, for the weeks you and your daughter suffered because of my choices." Marcus's hands trembled slightly on the table. "I know it's inadequate. I know sorry doesn't fix what I broke, but I needed to say it anyway." "Why me?" Ethan asked, the question that had haunted him for months. "Why choose me specifically?" "Because you were invisible." Marcus's voice was hollow. "You were maintenance staff. I thought no one would question it. No one would dig deeper. No one would care. You were convenient and disposable." He paused. "I didn't think of you as a person with a life and a child and dreams. You were just a means to an end, and that makes me a monster." The confession hung between them, ugly and honest. Ethan felt something release in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of closure. Understanding that Marcus's crime had been one of selective blindness, the same blindness that had allowed everyone at Hartwell Industries to walk past Ethan for a year without seeing him. "I was a person the whole time," Ethan said quietly. "I had always been a person. Your inability to see that says everything about you and nothing about me." "I know that now." Marcus looked down at his hands. "Too late, but I know it. For what it's worth, I've been following the articles about you, the sensor array project, the Opportunity Engineering Division. You're doing remarkable work. You're proving that the people the system overlooks are often the most valuable." "Not for your sake," Ethan said firmly. "I didn't rebuild my life to vindicate your opinion of me. I did it for Sophie, for myself, for everyone else who's been made invisible." "I know, but it still matters." Marcus met his eyes. "Thank you for coming, and thank you for not letting what I did destroy you. You deserved better than what I gave you." Ethan left the prison feeling strangely light, as if a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had finally lifted. The anger was gone. The need for Marcus to suffer had evaporated. What remained was simply the knowledge that he'd survived, thrived, and built something meaningful from the wreckage. Fall arrived with Sophie starting 4th grade, more confident and secure than she'd been in years. Ethan's position had solidified into something sustainable, challenging work that mattered, flexibility to be present for his daughter, colleagues who respected his contributions. The sensor array system was being installed in wind farms across 3 states. Opportunity Engineering had expanded to 22 employees. On a Tuesday in October, almost exactly 1 year after he'd paid for Lena's coffee, Ethan returned to the coffee shop on Moreau Street. Not for a meeting or an interview, just for coffee and a moment of reflection. The barista recognized him immediately. The usual? Please? While she prepared his drink, Ethan noticed a small sign by the register. Having trouble with your payment? Let us know. No one goes without coffee here. New policy? Ethan asked when she handed him his latte. Started about 6 months ago. The barista smiled. Some fancy executive came in and donated a bunch of money specifically for covering declined payments. Said someone once helped her when she needed it and she wanted to pay that forward. We probably cover 3 or 4 people a week now. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Lena had taken his $20 gesture and transformed it into ongoing grace for strangers. The ripple effect of one impulsive choice, amplified and sustained. That's really beautiful, he managed. It is. The barista glanced around the busy shop. You'd be surprised how many people need just a small kindness to get through a hard day. Sometimes coffee isn't just coffee, you know? Ethan took his latte to the same table where everything had changed a year ago. He thought about the man he'd been then, desperate, hungry, down to his last $20, making a choice that seemed foolish in the moment. He thought about everything that had flowed from that choice, the recognition, the restoration, the opportunity to rebuild not just his own life, but create pathways for others. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Don't forget my school concert tonight. I have a solo! Ethan smiled, typing back quickly. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Soph. So proud of you. Another text, this one from Lena. Board meeting went great. Opportunity engineering expansion approved for next quarter. 20 more positions. You're changing lives, Ethan. He sat in the coffee shop, surrounded by the ordinary bustle of people living their lives, and felt the full weight of gratitude settle over him. Not just for his own restoration, but for the chance to be part of something larger. To prove that kindness wasn't weakness, that second chances mattered, that the people society overlooked often had the most to offer. A young woman approached the counter, her clothes worn and her face tired. Ethan watched as she pulled out a card to pay for her coffee. The terminal beeped. Declined. She tried again. Still declined. Her shoulders slumped, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. The barista smiled gently. Don't worry about it. It's covered. Really? The woman's voice cracked. I can pay you back tomorrow. My account is... No need. Just enjoy your coffee. The woman took her drink with tears in her eyes, mumbling thank you over and over. She found a corner table and sat down, wrapped her hands around the cup like it was precious, and Ethan saw himself in her, the version of himself from a year ago, surviving moment by moment, unable to see past the immediate crisis. He wanted to tell her it would get better, that this hard moment wouldn't define her forever, that kindness received could become kindness given, and grace had a way of multiplying if you let it. But she needed to discover that for herself, in her own time, through her own journey. That evening, Ethan sat in the school auditorium surrounded by other parents, watching Sophie take the stage for her solo. She looked so small up there, but when she began to sing, her voice was clear and confident and absolutely beautiful. Around him, parents held up phones to record the moment. Ethan did the same, but he also just watched, really watched, his daughter shine. This was what he'd been fighting for during those desperate weeks. This moment, this joy. This glimpse of Sophie becoming exactly who she was meant to be. After the concert, Sophie ran to him with glowing pride. Did you hear me? I didn't mess up once. You were perfect, Soph. Absolutely perfect. Can we celebrate? Maybe pizza? Anything you want. They went to the pizza place near their apartment, the same one Sophie had asked about during the worst days when pizza had seemed impossibly expensive. They ordered her favorite toppings, an extra cheese, and Sophie talked nonstop about the concert, about her friends, about the book report she was working on. Ethan listened and laughed and felt his heart so full it almost hurt. This was success, not the patents or the recognition or the prestigious position. This, his daughter's happiness, their stability, the simple luxury of celebrating small victories without fear. Over pizza, Sophie grew serious suddenly. Daddy? Do you remember when we only had crackers? I remember. I was really scared then, not because I was hungry, but because you seemed so sad, like maybe you were going to disappear like Mommy did. The confession hit Ethan hard. Soph, I'm so sorry you felt that way. It's okay, you didn't disappear. You got better. Sophie reached across the table and squeezed his hand. And now we have pizza whenever we want. And you smile all the time. And sometimes you even hum again. You're right, I do. I'm glad, Sophie said simply, because you're my favorite person and I like it when you're happy. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan sat on his futon, which they could afford to replace now with a real bed, but he kept it as a reminder, and reflected on the year's journey, from desperation to restoration, from invisibility to influence, from surviving to thriving. He thought about Marcus Chen in prison, learning too late that people mattered, about Lena Hartwell creating policies to ensure others didn't suffer what he'd suffered, about the coffee shop's new practice of covering declined payments, about the students he'd spoken to and the people he'd hired through opportunity engineering, about Janelle Martinez and the 11 others whose lives had changed because someone had finally given them a chance. The $20 he'd given away hadn't been lost. It had been invested, not in a transaction, but in dignity, in grace, in the radical notion that people deserved kindness even when, especially when, they had nothing to offer in return. His phone buzzed one more time. A message from an unknown number. Mr. Brooks, my name is David Kim. I read about your opportunity engineering program in an article. I'm a 52-year-old former line cook who just finished a coding boot camp. No degree, no corporate experience, just skills and determination. I know I don't fit the usual profile, but I'm hoping you might give me a chance to prove myself. I have nowhere else to turn. Ethan read the message twice, seeing echoes of his own desperation in the carefully worded plea. He typed back quickly. David, send me your resume and let's set up a time to talk. Everyone deserves a chance to be seen. Looking forward to hearing your story. He hit send and set the phone down, smiling in the darkness. The ripple effect continued. The investment multiplied. The grace extended outward in ways he couldn't measure or control. Somewhere across the city, David Kim was probably staring at his phone in disbelief, hardly daring to hope that someone had actually responded. Ethan remembered that feeling, the desperate gratitude of being acknowledged, the fragile possibility that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Tomorrow he'd interview David. Next week he'd present the opportunity engineering expansion to the board. Next month he'd speak at another university. The work would continue, the impact would grow, the systems would slowly change. But tonight he was simply a father in a small apartment, listening to his daughter breathe in the next room, grateful beyond measure for second chances, and the simple truth that kindness, even foolish, impossible, $20 kindness, could change everything. Ethan closed his eyes and let himself feel it all. The grief that had shaped him, the struggle that had tested him, the grace that had restored him, the purpose that now drove him. He wasn't the person he'd been before Sarah's illness, and he wasn't the person he'd been in his darkest moments. He was someone new, forged by loss and struggle, and the stubborn refusal to let circumstances define his worth. Outside, the city hummed with its endless life. People were struggling, surviving, hoping for their own moments of grace. Somewhere, someone was making an impossible choice with their last $20. Somewhere, someone was learning they mattered when they'd been told they didn't. Somewhere, the ripple effect of kindness was spreading in ways no one could predict or contain. And Ethan Brooks, engineer, father, survivor, advocate, slept peacefully, knowing he'd played his small part in making the world a little more gracious, a little more just, a little more aware that the people we overlook are often the ones who matter most. The morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to extend the grace he'd received. But for now, this was enough. This was everything. This was home.